Dark Sleep Radio is back, and I'm here to share another real-life encounter from beyond the ordinary. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Get comfortable and settle in. The hike near Trinity Site wasn't about exploring restricted areas. My girlfriend Eliza was determined to trek every marked trail in southern New Mexico before the year ended. This particular stretch near Mockingbird Gap wasn't popular. No shade, no water, just a featureless landscape with historical significance. We set out early, around 7:30 a.m., with the October sun already beating down. Our gear was minimal: water, dried fruit, first aid kit, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS-enabled phone. She always liked documenting our routes, and typically her app and my watch logged identical paths. The dirt track started at an old cattle gate, following what was once a supply road during the Manhattan Project. The terrain was nothing but gravel, scrub, and endless yucca plants. About an hour in, we passed a sun-bleached coyote carcass. Eliza joked it was a bad omen, suggesting we should have brought sage. Walking was easy across the flat landscape. Heat waves danced over the sand, and the scenery became increasingly sparse. Eliza checked her phone, noting we'd covered 3.8 miles and were making good time. We paused briefly in the meager shade of a small rocky outcrop. The trail then descended into a dry, cracked arroyo with scattered animal tracks curving toward a low ridge. That's when everything changed. Walking side by side, we were quiet, just the sound of our boots and occasional wind. Suddenly, we both stopped simultaneously. The silence was absolute. No wind, no sound, just complete, unnatural stillness. We were hiking through a desert that felt different, oppressive. No insects, no birds. The air hung heavy, like entering a sealed room. I nodded when Eliza asked if I heard something, though I hadn't. She glanced toward a dry ridge about 30 yards off trail, and something metallic seemed to drag in the distance. For half a minute, we stood listening. Then something imperceptible changed. The light shifted as if the sun had moved behind clouds, but the sky remained clear. Everything flattened, like someone had lowered the contrast on a screen. We started walking again, though I can't recall deciding to move. Suddenly, a breeze returned. The brush swayed and heat enveloped me without warning. Looking around, I felt disoriented. The arroyo looked deeper, and the ridge seemed closer than before. Eliza was 20 feet ahead, squinting at her phone. She called back, asking if we'd missed a turn. Comparing GPS tracks, we discovered something strange. Both our devices showed an unexplained gap, a 58-minute chunk simply missing. One moment we were half a mile back, the next we jumped a mile forward. No gradual drift, just an abrupt skip. Our screens told the same story. My Garmin showed a complete data interruption. No heart rate, no elevation, no pace. 1 second walking at 3.2 miles per hour, then nothing, then back to normal as if nothing happened. We weren't dizzy, no headaches, nothing felt wrong physically. But two devices experiencing the exact same anomaly seemed too coincidental. We decided to turn back. An unsettling silence surrounded us. The wind sounded muffled, distant. Each step echoed strangely. Halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something in the sand. A metal rod about 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought it might be old survey equipment. The day started like any other hike. We found this strange object, a thin, dull gray cylinder stuck in the ground with no markings. Something about it made me uneasy. When she reached out to touch it, I blurted out, "Don't," without really knowing why. The air suddenly felt oppressively hot. We snapped a few pictures, but glare made them useless. We marked the location on her app, but later discovered the pin had vanished. Back at the car, we both felt exhausted in a way that seemed disproportionate to our 8-mile trek on flat terrain. Something was off. The dashcam timestamp showed we should have returned around noon, but it was 1:17 p.m. Stranger still, neither of us could recall stopping or taking a break. No shade, no food, just a missing hour. That evening, we tried uploading the GPS data to her laptop. The files looked intact, but zooming into the gap revealed only empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and opened it in a text editor. Finding the file jumped abruptly from PO4312 to Vol.01 with no errors or signs of corruption. We haven't returned to that trail since. What's most bizarre is we've never experienced GPS issues anywhere else, even in more remote locations. Just that stretch, 1 hour we can't remember. 1 mile we didn't walk. My night photography mission started routinely. Around 3 a.m., I was positioned northwest of Groom Lake, maybe 2 miles east of the old perimeter. Complete silence surrounded me. No breeze, no animal sounds, just my camera's soft shutter clicks. I'd driven from Alamo, Nevada, parking my Jeep on a gravel access road and hiking the final stretch to avoid drawing attention. This wasn't my first time. I knew the routine. My goal wasn't investigating anything unusual. I was simply there for the sky. The Milky Way out here is breathtaking, clean, wide, and untouched by light pollution. I'd scouted this spot weeks earlier, marking the elevation on my GPS. 2 tripods, a Sony A7R IV, and my old Pentax accompanied me. The night had been perfect. Clear sky, excellent air clarity. I'd set the camera to ISO 600 with a 20mm lens and let it run. I was out taking long exposure shots in interval mode, already having captured around 24 frames. While reviewing the preview screen, I noticed an annoying plane trail, a dotted line of red and white blinking across one image. I was kneeling by my gear, swapping SD cards when something strange happened. The sound simply vanished. Not just a specific noise, but everything. The distant insect rustle, the faint electronic hum, even my own breathing felt muted. It wasn't complete silence, more like someone had dampened the world's volume to about 30%, as if cotton were stuffed in my ears. A peculiar pressure surrounded me, similar to altitude changes, though I hadn't moved. Looking up, I saw nothing but stars, no unusual shapes or lights, yet an unmistakable sensation of being watched crept over me. That primal, instinctive awareness animals experience. The hair on my arm stood up, and a sudden, intense certainty gripped me. Something enormous was directly overhead. Not like a passing aircraft, but physically present right above me. No sound, no movement, just an overwhelming weight. I remained frozen, crouched and staring into the black sky for a full minute. Then, as abruptly as it began, everything returned. Insects buzzed, my hearing normalized, the camera's low clicking resumed. A soft breeze drifted across the sage brush. I tried rationalizing it, maybe a pressure drop or passing thermal, but something felt off. I packed up quickly, my hands slightly shaking. The location no longer felt safe, not in a threatening way, but as if I'd intruded somewhere forbidden. I hiked back to my Jeep, constantly scanning the sky. No lights, helicopters, or patrols followed me. Arriving in Henderson just before sunrise, I didn't review the files until 2 days later. Dumping them onto my external drive, I began sorting through the images. Most were excellent. Crisp stars, smooth light trails. Even the jet-streaked frame looked fine. Then I reached frame 114. The timestamp confirmed 3:07 a.m., but everything else was inexplicably wrong. What should have been a standard northwest sky exposure with stars and lake bed silhouette was instead a bizarre diagonal light smear. Thick, pale, and oddly structured, it resembled a wide stripe of melted glass running from lower right to upper left. This wasn't a camera malfunction. Surrounding stars remained sharp, with no motion blur, and the tripod hadn't moved. The photo haunts me. It was just a single frame, but something extraordinary happened. In the middle of an otherwise normal night sky photograph, there was this smear, not a lens flare or digital glitch. It had depth, texture, like something massive had ripped through space at an impossible speed, leaving a trace of itself behind. When I zoomed in, the details were startling. The pixels were consistent, with subtle color gradations and shadowing. Parts looked almost transparent, like layers of gauze catching light. At its center, a faint structure emerged, not quite definable, but clearly not random. Sharp angles mixed with smooth curves, so subtle it seemed to be moving too quickly to be fully captured. No sound, no blur, just this impossible presence sliced across a single moment. I checked the surrounding frames. 113 and 115 were completely normal, identical compositions of stars. Same shutter speed, same exposure, no trail, no time gap. It was as if this thing existed only for that single instant. I tried to recreate it. Multiple attempts in the desert, same camera, same settings, same time of night, nothing. I even tried deliberately moving the tripod mid-exposure to see if I could fake the effect. Nothing worked. Any real motion blurred the stars, but this didn't. Jack, a veteran astrophotographer from a local gallery, studied the image intensely. He asked about my post-processing. When I explained there was none, this was straight from the camera card, he went quiet. His only advice: back up the raw file and keep it to myself. Now the file sits on a separate drive. I find myself looking at it late at night when sleep eludes me. But the strangest part isn't the image itself. It's how it changed my memory of that night. I can't recall packing up or walking back to the Jeep. What I remember is a profound silence, a sense of something massive just beyond perception. Suddenly, I'm driving toward Vegas. My watch shows no lost time, and the GPS log seems normal. Yet something feels fundamentally altered, as if whatever passed overhead didn't just leave a trail in the sky, but carved a path through memory and perception itself. Something shifted: time, space, consciousness. The photo feels like evidence of something that shouldn't exist, something that defies explanation. I was up on the ridge near Tiku Peak, a spot I'd been wanting to shoot for a while. The trail narrows and rocks flatten out there, far from any light pollution. It was just me that night. Eric had backed out, saying he was sick. Not ideal going solo, but I'd already taken time off and prepped my gear. Late afternoon, I hiked up with water and a headlamp. Golden hour shots first, then I set up the time-lapse as the sun dipped below the ridge. The desert chill hit fast. That dry, thin cold where heat seems to vanish from the rocks. No wind, no clouds, just absolute silence, broken occasionally by gravel crunching under my weight. I sat about 10 feet from my tripod, wrapped in a sleeping bag, sipping lukewarm instant coffee and watching the sky transform. One of those moments that makes you feel small in a good way. My Sony mirrorless was set to capture a frame every 15 seconds over 6 hours. Nothing fancy, but good enough to catch starlight with a wide lens. Around 2:30 a.m. I packed up, hiked down in darkness, and drove back to Caliente. The SD card sat in my camera bag for almost 2 days while I caught up on sleep and errands. When I finally reviewed the footage at my kitchen table with a beer, everything seemed normal at first. Stars streaked in slow arcs around Polaris, the desert floor dark except for distant highway headlight flashes. Watching it double speed, then slowing down, that's when I saw it. The light. 42 megabytes of something I can't explain. I haven't been back to that spot. Haven't shot long exposures since. I spent hours staring at the recording, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Initially, I thought it was a planet hanging low on the horizon near a familiar rock formation from my earlier hike. But something was off. While all other celestial objects traced smooth arcs across the sky, this single light remained perfectly stationary. For nearly 6 hours, it held its position. From about 30 minutes after I started recording until just 20 minutes before I stopped. Suspicious, I went back to check the original frames, worried it might be a dead pixel or camera sensor error. But it wasn't. When I panned across, the light shifted slightly, maintaining consistent noise and clarity with surrounding stars. Its brightness was comparable to a first magnitude star, yet it didn't flicker or fade like the others. I consulted star charts and satellite trackers, searching for an explanation. Vega, Deneb, other known celestial markers, nothing matched. I even reviewed older flight logs, hoping to identify a high-altitude balloon or unusual aircraft. No luck. Boosting the contrast revealed something stranger. The mapped star movements created beautiful concentric arcs, but this light remained the only fixed point. Not Polaris, not any known reference star. Zoomed in, I noticed a brief anomaly around 1:17 a.m. A small flicker lasting 2 or 3 frames where the light momentarily brightened before returning to normal. Then at exactly 2:15, it vanished. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt disappearance. One frame it existed, the next it was gone, with no motion trail or drift. Curious, I checked the audio track. Despite complete silence, no wind, animals, or human sounds, I detected a low-frequency hum just before 1:18, so faint I had to amplify it 5 times to hear anything. It lasted 4 seconds and then stopped. File metadata showed everything was normal. No frame corruption, no skipped sections. I hesitated to share my discovery, dismissing it as a potential artifact or reflection. Yet I kept returning to the footage, mesmerized by this tiny, unmoving point of light suspended against the moving celestial backdrop. A week later, during a football game at Eric's place, I finally showed him the recording. We watched it together during halftime. He viewed it twice, initially silent, his expression unreadable. He sat back and looked at me for a second, then asked, That one star there, why isn't it moving? I told him I didn't know. You know what's over that ridge, right? Yeah, Groom Lake. That whole area is off limits. I never got close enough to see anything, but you feel the weight of that place when you're out there. Not in a dramatic way, just quiet, still like the air is watching you. Eric didn't ask to see it again. We changed the subject. That night, I copied the footage to a flash drive and put it in a drawer. A few weeks later, I went back out to the same ridge with the same gear. Clear night, similar setup. This time, I stayed out the full 8 hours. Nothing unusual. The stars moved like they were supposed to. No stationary light, no flicker, just normal sky. But when I played back the audio from that night, I caught something faint at the start of the second hour. Not a hum this time, a kind of clicking, like two pieces of plastic tapping together in a slow rhythmic pattern. 3 clicks, then silence, then 3 more. I checked the footage again. Nothing visible, but the clicks repeated, always in threes, spaced about 90 seconds apart. It went on like that for maybe 15 minutes, then not ping for the rest of the night. I haven't been back to that ridge since. Late September last year, I was hiking alone in the Shoshone Mountains. It was that in-between weather, warm during the day, dropping fast once the sun dipped. Dry air, but the kind of quiet that makes every step sound too loud. The trail I was on wasn't even a real trail, more like an old access road that hadn't been maintained in decades. I'd been following it for a couple miles past where most maps stopped marking anything. I wasn't trying to be a daredevil or anything. I just liked being alone in places no one cared about anymore. I had a paper USGS map in my pack with faded ink, and it showed this old Cold War era communications site near the summit. Just a single square marked bulb, no name, no description. I figured it'd be interesting to check out. The satellite view online showed a faint clearing and what looked like the outline of a small foundation. So I aimed for that. I got there a little before sunset. The building was long gone. Just a concrete pad and a couple rusted brackets sticking up like rebar bones. No fence. I was out exploring a remote area with rocky terrain when I spotted something unusual. 2 perfect circles, each about 3 feet across, were pressed into the exposed stone surface. They weren't carved or drilled, but looked like something heavy had gently touched down and left without a trace. The location was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind. Just me and this concrete slab with late sunlight stretching my shadow across the ground. Scattered around were broken ceramic insulators from old antenna towers and a few half-buried lengths of coax cable with shielding that flaked like dead bark. I checked the surrounding landscape. There was no way a vehicle could have reached this spot. The slope was too steep and rocky, with the old road collapsed a mile back. Only a dirt bike might manage such terrain. Yet these smooth, slightly sunken circles sat side by side, mysterious and unexplained. Almost on impulse, I snapped a photo with my phone. Nothing special, just a quick shot. I didn't think much of it then, planning to maybe look it up later. The sun was dropping fast, and I wanted to descend before darkness fell. About 10 minutes into my return trip, I noticed something strange. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind. My footsteps seemed muffled, as if the rocks weren't reflecting sound normally. I stopped and listened. Silence. Then came a low-frequency hum. Faint, but constant. It reminded me of sitting in a car with windows closed near an idling diesel truck, more felt than heard. I wondered if my phone was picking up some weird interference. When I pulled it out, the screen was black. Earlier it had 64% battery, but now it was completely unresponsive. As I continued walking with my battery pack plugged in, the hum gradually faded. Normal sounds returned: birds, a breeze rustling brush, a distant coyote's yip. I tried to rationalize the experience, thinking it might be underground interference from old mining tunnels. But something told me this was different. Night had fallen, and I was camped in a small clearing among the pines, 2 miles from the site. After cooking a freeze-dried meal, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange vibration. Not quite an earthquake, but a rhythmic pulsing through my sleeping pad. It felt like someone walking slowly in circles outside my tent, not loud but definitely present. When I unzipped the tent flap, the night was perfectly still. Stars glinted like razor blades in a clear sky, and no movement caught my eye. The thumping ceased instantly. I sat there, boots half on, waiting. Nothing stirred. No wind, no wildlife. Just a faint smell lingered. Warm metal, like an engine cooling down after sitting idle. Sleep was impossible after that. At first I packed up and hiked out, skipping breakfast. Back at my car, parked at the Ranger pull-off, something was off. The radio was on, scanning frantically through static, jumping stations every half second. I'd locked the car and turned off the engine, but now the ignition sat in accessory mode, battery nearly drained. I sat with the door open, trying to collect myself. It wasn't fear exactly, more a sense of temporal disorientation, like someone had spliced out a few seconds of reality. When I got to town and checked my phone, the photo of the circles had vanished. Other pictures remained, trailheads, rocks, deer by a creek, but the summit shot was gone. No deletion record, no backup. The last photo's timestamp ended 2 minutes before I remembered taking the circle image. A week later, I returned. Same route, same summit. Everything looked identical, except the circles had disappeared completely. Not filled in or damaged, simply gone. The rock appeared untouched, as if they'd never existed. But something was different. The lichen pattern seemed slightly off, and while green moss typically clung to the rock's cracks everywhere else, these two spots were eerily bare. No growth, no discoloration. For 8 years, I worked as a park ranger in the Sawtooth Wilderness of Idaho, mostly handling routine tasks like patrolling trails, checking campsites, and helping lost hikers. But some nights were different, clear, cold nights when an unexplained phenomenon would occur. Always after midnight but before dawn, on certain still nights with cloudless skies, a strange low droning would emerge. This wasn't a natural sound. No wind, insects, trucks, or planes could explain it. It felt like a deep vibration pulsing through the ground, almost like a distant subwoofer turned way down. The first time I noticed it, I thought it might be tinnitus or my ears playing tricks. But this wasn't inside my head. The sound seemed to emanate from the earth or the surrounding air. When it started, my vision would blur subtly, as if the world was vibrating too quickly for my eyes to focus properly. One particularly memorable night near Redfish Lake, under a star-filled sky with the Milky Way stretching across the horizon, I experienced something even stranger. While sitting on a rock above the trail, eating trail mix and watching the moonlit lake surface, the hum began. First as a barely perceptible vibration through my boot soles. Later, I discovered an odd sight with stone circles that behaved peculiarly. My GPS would drift, jump, and freeze when I stood in the center of these circles. Moving just 5 feet away would cause it to snap back. I tested this multiple times, always getting the same result. I tried searching government databases for information about the site. Military records, FAA towers, anything. All I found was a cryptic note in a declassified file mentioning a temporary relay installation from 1963 to 1968, which was subsequently removed. Since then, I haven't returned to that summit, and I'm not sure I want to know more. The wilderness held a strange secret, and I was about to discover it. That first night, something unusual began with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath me. It wasn't loud, but it was overwhelming, a sound that seemed to resonate with an invisible frequency. My perception started to shift. My vision went fuzzy, and my entire head felt slightly disconnected from reality, as if I'd slipped into a dreamlike state between consciousness and something else entirely. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. It wasn't just the normal quiet of a forest at night. This was different. No wind, no animal sounds, no rustling leaves, complete stillness. For a full minute, or maybe longer, the world seemed to hold its breath. I couldn't even hear my own heart beat. Looking around, I half expected something to happen. Nothing did, but an unsettling feeling crept over me, a sense of being watched from the shadows beyond the tree line. Something wasn't right. Was this seismic activity? Distant machinery? But this was hundreds of miles from any factory or power plant. Over the following months, the hum returned several times. Each occurrence followed the same pattern, a deep, vibrating drone that blurred my vision, followed by an unnatural silence. I tried to document it, using a handheld mic and an old tape recorder, but every time, something strange happened. Batteries would die instantly, or devices would shut off without warning. Even my phone produced only static or complete silence. Late one September evening in Elk Meadow, the experience intensified. The hum was louder, more persistent, filling the entire clearing. Sitting on a fallen log, I tried to stay calm as the sound seemed to thicken the air around me like a sonic fog. This time, something new happened, a pressure in my chest, as if the air had become physically heavier. The silence that followed was longer and more oppressive than ever. My ears popped, a faint ringing began, and beneath it all, that lingering sensation of being watched, of something just beyond understanding, remained. The silence was absolute. No birds, no crickets, no owls, nothing. Just complete stillness. At first I thought it was my imagination or the result of too much solitude, but then something caught my eye in the trees beyond the clearing, a dark, low movement that vanished the moment I tried to focus on it. This wasn't like any animal I'd ever encountered. It moved more like a shadow sliding across bark and leaves. I was ready to leave, but a soft crackling sound stopped me, like electricity sparking quietly. No power lines were anywhere nearby. The moment I concentrated on the sound, it disappeared, leaving behind a vibrating hum that seemed to pulse through the ground. I hurried back to my truck, not daring to look behind me. The dashboard radio was dead static, which was unusual for this area. When I shared the experience with ranger friends, they dismissed it as mining operations or natural gas vents. But park records showed no industrial activity, just pure wilderness. Years later, after leaving the ranger job and moving away from Idaho, the experience haunted me. My dreams were filled with an invisible vibration that made the world pulse and stretch. When I tried to listen closely, everything would go silent, and time would seem to slow down. I'd wake up feeling off balance, as if something inside me was still resonating at that strange frequency. Now, when I'm hiking or camping in quiet, still places, I find myself listening, waiting. Sometimes, just beneath the wind or distant river, I hear that unplaceable drone. It makes the world's edges feel less defined, less solid. I've never seen anything definitive. No lights, no shapes, just that persistent hum and the blurry vision that comes with it. The heavy silence always follows, leaving me with more questions than answers. It happened that night, driving home from a weekend trip in the Rockies, heading back to Denver through Berthoud Pass. Late at night, with nothing but darkness and mountain roads ahead. The highway stretched out before me, mostly empty except for an occasional truck or camper. It was an early October afternoon, with the sun starting to dip and casting long, strange shadows. Pine and cold earth scented the air as yellow and orange leaves dotted the landscape. I'd left my friend's cabin near Estes Park that morning, on a drive I'd done dozens of times before. Around mile marker 88, my phone suddenly dropped from full LTE to no signal at all. Just that spinning wheel trying to connect. I checked it a few times. No messages, no calls, no Google Maps updates. This seemed normal for the pass, known for patchy service in the deeper valleys. I kept driving, expecting the signal to return any moment. The road wound narrow in spots, with rocky cliffs on one side and steep drop-offs on the other. A thin mist was rolling in, blurring the edges of the trees as darkness began to settle. After 15 minutes, still no service. I checked my phone again, battery at 60%, so no immediate concern. Yet that spinning wheel remained, stubbornly refusing to connect. Something felt off. No cars passed going the other way. No birds, no wind, just an unnerving silence filling my car's cabin. Then I noticed the speedometer. I'd been driving exactly 18 minutes since losing signal, but my phone's location services hadn't updated at all. I'd had GPS on earlier to check traffic, and the location history showed a strange gap. When service returned, it immediately updated my location about 2 miles past where I'd lost signal. For those entire 18 minutes, there was no location data saved. The timeline simply jumped forward, as if those minutes had vanished into thin air. That's when I truly started to get weirded out. Something strange happened during my mountain drive. I'd been traveling normally when my phone's GPS suddenly went silent. For 18 minutes, I completely disappeared from the map. No tracking, no line, just a blank space. This was bizarre because my phone had been working perfectly before and after this moment. I wasn't in airplane mode, and GPS typically works independently of cell service. The satellites should have tracked me regardless of cellular connection. When the signal returned, I pulled over and carefully checked my phone. The clock and timer were perfectly synchronized, confirming those 18 minutes had indeed passed. Replaying the map history revealed something unsettling. Before the gap, the road curved through mountain terrain. After the gap, the route looked identical, but in between, nothing. It was as if I'd vanished. I'd been driving continuously with no stops or detours. Unfortunately, my dash cam was uncharged, so I had no visual evidence beyond this GPS anomaly. Back on the road, I drove slower, scanning the sky, cliffs, and tree edges for anything unusual. The mist thickened, and daylight faded. About 10 minutes later, a strange smell caught my attention. It wasn't sharp like smoke, but a faint metallic scent, something like ozone mixed with wet earth. At another turnout, I rolled down the windows. The odor was stronger here, almost overwhelming with a deep breath. I photographed the surrounding trees and rocks, wondering if this was some natural phenomenon. Strangely, no cars had passed me. The road was eerily quiet, interrupted only by my engine and occasional bird calls. Low-hanging mist seemed to grow denser. I tried texting my roommate about running late, but the message wouldn't send. 3 miles further, cell signal suddenly returned at full strength. My phone buzzed with a flood of delayed texts and notifications. Maps immediately resumed tracking my route. Back home, I thoroughly examined the phone data. No app crashes or bugs were evident, just those 18 minutes of missing location data. The timestamps aligned perfectly with my actual travel time. Everything seemed normal, yet that inexplicable gap remained. Late October, just outside Durango, Colorado, I was camping with my dog Tucker in a secluded forest basin. The temperature required layers but hadn't yet brought snow. After parking off a Forest Service road and hiking about a mile, I set up camp in a spot I knew well from previous trips, surrounded by tall pines with a clear sky view. Something felt different this time. Tucker, my German Shepherd mix, is typically unflappable, not one to bark without reason or get spooked easily. That's why what happened next was so unsettling. Around 6:30, after itching the tent, I was collecting firewood when Tucker suddenly froze mid-stride. His ears shot straight up, his tail rigid and stiff. I initially thought he might have spotted a deer or elk, but his behavior was unusual. Instead of his typical investigative approach, he simply stood motionless, staring intently up the ridge into the trees. When I called his name and clapped, he didn't respond, he just remained frozen. Walking over, I touched his back. He flinched as if startled, then slowly looked up and followed me back to the fire pit. For the rest of the night, he stayed unusually close, even while I cooked, a departure from his normal habit of wandering and chasing scents. This time, he lay down with his head resting on my boot. By 7:45, darkness had fully settled. The night was moonless, with a clear, star-filled sky and a biting cold that made me pull my layers tight. Something about the experience felt strange, almost disconnected from normal reality. Later, reflecting on the incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual had occurred. When driving mountain roads or hiking alone, I still wonder about that night. The precision was remarkable. Exactly 18 minutes of unexplained silence, no location data, no signal interruption anywhere else. It was like a perfect, inexplicable cutout in reality. I've tried to rationalize it, perhaps a GPS blackout zone or a software glitch, but I've found no record of known interference on Berthoud Pass. Friends familiar with the area mentioned occasional cell drops but never complete GPS failure. When I retraced the route under similar conditions, everything seemed normal. The whole experience feels like it happened in an isolated bubble of time and space. Something was watching, or perhaps the pass itself shifted in a way I can't comprehend. I haven't returned since, not yet. Tucker was locked onto a patch of sky, staring intently. Not scanning, just fixed on one spot slightly west of directly overhead. I'd been sitting by my small fire, sipping bourbon from a metal cup, when he suddenly went rigid. At first, I thought he might have spotted a bat or owl, but minutes ticked by and he hadn't looked away. His ears would twitch occasionally, and his lips pulled back as if baring teeth. No growling yet, just that intense, unbroken stare. Then, without warning, he stood and began a low, constant rumble deep in his throat. No barking, just that steady growl. I followed his gaze upward. Stars, nothing but stars. Same pattern, same brightness, no satellites, no planes, no clouds. I even switched off my headlamp to let my eyes fully adjust. Still nothing unusual, but Tucker kept growling. Same spot, unmoving. This continued for nearly an hour. I checked the time repeatedly, expecting him to stop or shift. He remained standing, focused, warning something invisible. A strange pressure began building in my chest. Not panic, but a visceral sense that something was wrong, despite everything appearing normal. The fire crackled, wind rustled through trees occasionally, stars remained fixed. Around 9:10, when I looked down to add another stick to the fire, I noticed something odd. The shadows had shifted weirdly. They were stretching sideways, not flickering naturally. Something bright but unseen seemed to be manipulating them silently. I squinted upward again. Nothing visible. The stars where Tucker stared looked unnaturally static, like a photograph pasted onto the sky. No twinkling, no subtle movement. In the center, one point of light seemed subtly wrong. Not brighter or differently colored, just off, inexplicably out of place. Suddenly, Tucker erupted into sharp, rapid barking. He lunged toward the fire, hackles raised, eyes still fixed overhead. I grabbed his collar, trying to calm him. The fall of 2017 found me tracking elk migrations in the Taputs Plateau. Olo job for the Division of Wildlife that often took me deep into remote areas. I was out there alone, mapping movement patterns, when something strange happened. Tucker, my dog, started barking at a spot in the sky. Not just a quick bark, but a solid 20 minutes of nonstop noise. Foam gathered at his mouth by the end. Then suddenly, without warning, he stopped. Just sat down and stared, completely still. No growl, no movement. The silence felt worse than the barking. It was like something had noticed us back. The air changed, not colder, but dense and difficult to breathe. I felt lightheaded and sat on a rock. Then I heard it. A sound so low it was barely audible, yet I could feel it vibrating behind my teeth. I didn't move. The fire burned lower. My bourbon cup tipped over, but I didn't care. Tucker remained motionless, staring at something I couldn't see. Eventually, the pressure lifted. The weird sound faded. Shadows returned to normal. Tucker blinked, shook his head, and came to sit beside me. His eyes were red-rimmed. I checked my watch. 10:42. We'd been frozen in this moment for nearly 2 hours. That night, I kept the fire low. Tucker didn't bark again, but stayed alert, watching the flames like he was expecting something. At first light, we packed up and left. I drove straight back to town, avoiding the rearview mirror. 2 days later, I took Tucker to the vet. Not because of that night, I told myself, just a routine check. He was fine, but the vet noted his blood pressure was higher than normal for his breed. Something had stressed him out recently. I didn't elaborate. 6 months have passed. Tucker's okay now. He sleeps more and stays closer to me. Sometimes when we're in the yard and he sees the stars, he'll pause and stare briefly. Just long enough to make my heart race. I don't camp alone anymore. I was out tracking elk, working a tough sector southeast of Sunnyside near Brun Point in late September. The terrain is brutal, steep, long distances between everything, with barely any cell signal unless you're right on the ridge. That week, I was camping off a logging road, nights getting chilly with clear skies. We had 32 GPS collars on animals in that area. Expensive units programmed to ping every 15 minutes during peak hours and hourly overnight. They'd upload automatically to satellite, and I could check live data on my field tablet with an external antenna. Most days it worked fine, though cloud cover sometimes blocked the signal. This particular Thursday, I'd hiked about 8 miles replacing a broken camera. Got back to camp around dusk, heated up some chili, and crawled into my truck's bed around 9. The night was eerily quiet. No wind, no bugs, no owls, just absolute stillness. I noticed it, but didn't think much at the time. At 9:45 p.m., I checked the tablet one last time before sleeping. Every collar was functioning normally, the map showing a typical scatter of animals moving and bedding down. Then at 1:17 a.m., I woke up suddenly, fully alert without any apparent reason. No noise, just an instinctive awakening. I sat up and listened. Complete silence. No distant truck noise from the gas fields, which was unusual. There's always a background hum out there at night, compressors or something, but now it was like someone had muffled the entire world. Habitually, I grabbed the tablet to check data. Something was immediately off. The last location ping was at 12:06 a.m., which wasn't right for hourly tracking. I waited, thinking maybe the satellite link was down, but the weather was clear and the antenna signal strong. At 1:19 a.m., the data uploaded. All 32 callers came in simultaneously, but something felt wrong. When I opened individual logs, each showed an identical 9-minute gap between 12:06 and 12:15 a.m., a period with absolutely no recorded data. The movement resumed as if nothing had occurred. The next point was normal again. This wasn't like typical signal loss. When a caller usually drops connection, data gets cached and uploaded later, creating overlapping points. But this was different. It felt like everything had been simultaneously switched off and rebooted. I stepped out of the truck and walked into the trees. Something felt odd. My ears were stuffed with cotton, and the air seemed unnaturally heavy. I clapped once, just to hear something, but the sound felt strange, delayed and muffled. After standing there for about 2 minutes, I noticed a faint glow behind the western ridge. It wasn't moonlight. The moon wasn't even up. This glow was whiter, almost silver, diffuse and spread across the entire ridgeline. I crouched and killed my headlamp, watching carefully. Initially I thought it might be vehicle headlights, but there was no road up there, just scrubland. No movement, no shadows, no sound. Grabbing my binoculars from the truck, I set up on the tailgate and scanned the tree line. That's when I saw it, a shape barely visible against the glow. It wasn't on the ground, but suspended about 50 feet up, completely motionless. The shape defied description. Not a disc or triangle, it was like trying to trace a shadow in fog. Every blink seemed to alter its appearance slightly, yet its size remained consistent, around 20 feet wide. As I watched, the shape flickered, not like a light, but more like a skipping film reel. 1 second it was there, then gone, then back again. Suddenly, everything changed. The glow vanished. The shape disappeared. Instantly, normal night sounds rushed back. Crickets, wind through junipers, a distant compressor hum. I stood frozen, binoculars still raised. Nothing more happened. The ridge looked completely normal. When I finally checked my watch, only 9 minutes had passed. The time was 1:28 a.m. The night was crystal clear outside Topa, Nevada, with the Milky Way stretching overhead like a brushstroke. I'd driven out alone on a Sunday in late October, my old Dobsonian telescope secured in the truck and a thermos of coffee keeping me company. Amateur astronomy had been my hobby for about 6 years, nothing professional, just backyard stargazing. Tonopah offered some of the darkest skies in the state, and I appreciated the solitude. I parked at a gravel pull-off past a dry wash, with nothing around but low scrub and rock. Setting up on a flat patch beside the truck, I felt the cold, maybe low 40s, but the sky was pristine. No wind, no moon. My setup was simple: a red flashlight, a star map app, and a small Bluetooth speaker playing soft ambient music to break the silence. About 2 hours into my observation, something unusual caught my eye. While reclining in my camp chair and scanning the sky, I noticed a strange gap, a patch where stars seemed to vanish. Later that morning, I discovered something equally peculiar during my elk tracking work. I was monitoring a bull elk tagged 3 years earlier. When I hiked to the caller's location near the ridge, I found something odd. A perfect 30-foot circle of flattened underbrush lay below the slope, pressed clean without any tracks, scat, or signs of struggle. Just a pristine circular impression in otherwise normal terrain. Back at headquarters the next week, I pulled the full collar logs from internal backups. A mysterious 12:06 to 12:15 gap appeared, identical across all collars. No cached data, no explanation. The manufacturer confirmed they'd never seen simultaneous data losses like this outside a major satellite outage. But satellite coverage that night was complete and uninterrupted. I still have those logs, and I check them periodically, wondering about that unexplained moment when something seemingly impossible occurred. The night sky had gone weird. Something was moving up there, blacker than the darkness, round it. At first I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks, but as I watched, I knew this was different. It wasn't a solid shape exactly, but a triangular silhouette sliding through the stars. The object drifted almost like a leaf underwater, blocking out the stars behind it. No glint, no shine, just a shape wide at the back and narrowing to a point. I could see its edge passing in front of the Big Dipper. The world around me went completely silent. No wind, no insects, not even a rustle in the brush. I killed the music and stood up, tracking its movement. This wasn't like any drone I'd seen before. Those usually hum, flash, or wobble. This thing moved steadily, almost heavily, maintaining its precise angle. I tried to capture it on my phone, but the camera showed only darkness. When I looked through my telescope, it was too wide for the eyepiece, filling the entire view. For about 3 minutes, it crossed from northwest to overhead and then continued southeast. No texture, no detail, just a blank, dark shape. The stars gradually reappeared behind it. I stood frozen, not from fear exactly, but feeling oddly exposed, like I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's private space. When I returned to my telescope, something felt off. The finder scope wouldn't align properly. My manual mount's right ascension axis felt sluggish, almost sticky. I'd never experienced anything like it before. The altitude knob resisted as if under some strange tension. I finally pointed toward Andromeda, but something was wrong. The core looked far too dim for my current magnification. I checked the mirror with a flashlight. It was clean. But something had definitely changed. The desert was eerily quiet that night. We were camped north of the Mojave Preserve on a dirt road barely marked on any map. My 19-foot Lance trailer was equipped with solar panels, water tanks, and a small propane heater. It was the second night of our trip, and Jenna was experiencing her first boondocking adventure. The humidity was unusually low. My brand new flashlight suddenly died, despite fresh batteries I'd installed just that afternoon. I tapped it, tried turning it on and off, but nothing worked. My phone screen was functional, but the flashlight app froze and wouldn't open, getting stuck on the loading screen for 5 long minutes. I packed up quickly. The Dobsonian telescope was behaving strangely. Its base felt oddly stiff, as if slightly warped, and I couldn't secure it properly. Ultimately, I had to bungee cord it loosely in the truck to leave. When I started the engine, the dashboard lights flickered. The truck started, but all gauges remained dead for about 30 seconds before suddenly blinking to life. My clock reset to 1 a.m., though I was certain it had been closer to midnight. The drive back was surreal. No cars, no animals. I watched the sky, half expecting something to reappear, but nothing did. At home, I didn't unpack. I sat at the kitchen table, attempting to write down my experience, but struggling to describe what I'd seen. The next night, I set up the telescope in my backyard. Everything seemed normal, smooth movement, no resistance. My flashlight and phone worked perfectly, yet something was off. Andromeda looked dim. I checked other celestial targets, which appeared clear. I even borrowed a friend's refractor, but the galaxy still appeared hazy, as if a strange film covered just that section of sky. Now, I never stargaze alone. I'll go with my astronomy club, but solo trips are out of the question. I can't explain what happened. That triangle defied explanation. It didn't fly or hover. It moved quietly and slowly, watching, not from above, but from the side. The night had been calm, with only the occasional rustle of creosote in the breeze. We'd spent the evening grilling hot dogs and playing gin rummy until exhaustion set in around 10 or a bit later. No alcohol, no drugs, just a simple, relaxed evening. The windows were open with screens in place, and the vent fan hummed softly on low, keeping the air moving. The stars that night were extraordinary. Jenna had remarked on their incredible clarity, noting how densely the Milky Way stretched across the sky. Her last words before we drifted off were, "I've never seen it this dense before." I woke up in darkness, immediately sensing something was off. The trailer felt colder than when we'd fallen asleep. Reaching for the digital clock on the shelf, I found it was completely dead. Strange, since it ran on the trailer's 12-volt system, and the solar charge had been full earlier that day. My phone was equally unresponsive, just a blank, black screen. An unsettling silence had settled over everything. The vent fan had stopped completely, with no soft hum or air movement. Jenna stirred slightly but didn't wake. I noticed other signs of total electrical failure. The blue LED on the smoke detector was out, the little fridge light dark, and even the inverter's panel was blank. My Casio watch, which I'd worn continuously for a year, showed 4:17. The digital screen was dark, and the second hand hung suspended between ticks. Jenna's Fitbit showed the exact same time, frozen, lifeless. When I shook her awake and explained the situation, she quickly began checking her devices. Nothing worked. Not her phone, not the flashlight by the sink, not even the battery-powered lantern. Strangely, the batteries weren't drained or hot. They simply seemed to not exist. We opened the trailer door and stepped outside. The cold was different. Not like normal weather, but more like a complete absence of warmth. Barefoot on the sand and grit, I looked up. The stars looked wrong, though I couldn't immediately understand why. The desert sky was eerily still. Stars hung like sharp pinpricks in black paper, devoid of their usual twinkle. Something felt wrong. The air, typically alive with subtle desert shimmer, seemed frozen, holding its breath. Jenna and I stood outside the trailer, silent. She pointed towards some rocks, where a soft blue-white light hovered low to the ground. Not a beam, but a dull glow about 200 feet away. "Is that a car?" I whispered. No response. I moved around the trailer's side, hoping for a better view, but boulders obscured most of the scene. The light remained motionless, perfectly positioned where earth met sky. We watched for a minute before it vanished instantly. Not fading, just gone. Immediately after its disappearance, a strange sensation swept over us. Not a sound exactly, but a deep pressure. A silent hum pressed against our chests, lasting maybe 5 seconds before dissolving. We retreated inside. Jenna locked the door, an instinctive gesture despite being miles from anything. The stove light remained dead. Almost compulsively, I pulled back the curtain for one last look. 3 small lights now dotted the distant horizon, perfectly spaced, watching. 2 blinked out, leaving one briefly suspended. Hours seemed to pass. We lay in darkness, hands clasped, staring at the ceiling. The clock stubbornly read 4:17. Suddenly, the fridge compressor roared to life. The inverter's LED flickered. Jenna's Fitbit vibrated and illuminated. 6:49 a.m. The bedroom clock reset, blinking 12. Dawn crept over the ridge. Outside, everything appeared untouched. No tracks, no residual signs of the night's strange events. Yet every device with a clock, watch, Fitbit, phone, was frozen at 4:17 with no recorded activity between 10 p.m. and that moment. I checked the trailer's systems. Battery fully charged, solar panels functioning normally. Nothing explained the interruption. We left early, packing up right after breakfast. The place felt empty, not just quiet, empty. We drove into Barstow and Stowe, PP'd at a diner. Jenna asked me to drop the subject, and I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. So did she. Our trips are different now. We avoid remote areas completely. Last October, I was working a call near Cave Junction in southern Oregon. A voltage irregularity at the substation couldn't be cleared remotely, so dispatch sent me to check the line in person. It was around 6:40 p.m., near the end of my shift. I was hoping to reach Grants Pass before the diner closed. The location was isolated, an old tap along a ridge serving a few cabins and maybe a radio repeater. No cell service. I'd been there once or twice before. The dirt access road was steep and narrow, barely wide enough for the bucket truck. You park about a quarter-mile away and hike to the structure. The sun was low, casting deep orange light through the trees. A wet moss smell hung in the air from earlier rain. I remember stepping out to absolute silence, just water dripping from leaves. I grabbed my gear and hiked up the slope, approaching the tower from the east. It wasn't large, maybe 60 feet tall, an older single-circuit lattice structure. Close up, I heard the typical line hum, nothing unusual. No arcing, no bird strikes. The breaker seemed to have tripped upstream, but the hardware looked fine. I decided to do a full visual inspection. Walking the base, I checked insulators, tension hardware, and grounding. Everything appeared normal. Then I looked up at the cross arms, and that's when I saw it. Something was hovering above the tower's peak. At first, I thought it was a drone. About 2 feet across, matte black, with an odd shape I couldn't quite define. Angular, but without visible rotors. Unlike typical quadcopters, it remained perfectly still, suspended 10 or 15 feet above the peak, completely silent. I was doing a routine site inspection, checking equipment at a communications tower. What struck me most was the absolute silence. Unlike hobby drones I've used before, this was completely soundless. I stood frozen, scanning the area. Maybe someone was watching from the trees, I thought. But the signal range out here was terrible. No way anyone could control something precisely. I waved, just in case. Nothing happened. Then the object tilted, rotating to face me. I couldn't see a lens, but I felt like it was watching me. The air around it was strange. Leaves on the tower's top remained still, but there was a shimmer, like a heat distortion, right beneath where it hovered. This wasn't like typical propeller wash, it was a tight vertical column. Just as I was about to photograph it with my work phone, it vanished. No sound, no gradual movement. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. I instinctively followed its path and saw a flash. Not light exactly, but more like a quick tear in the clouds that immediately closed. I stood there, mouth agape, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out laughing. Nothing. Just the tower, woods, and the damp pine smell. I walked the perimeter again. Everything seemed unchanged. Equipment still hummed. The sky had darkened. When I reached my truck, it was 7:25. The inspection should have taken 20 to 30 minutes, but my last checklist timestamp was 6:42. Somehow, I'd been there over 40 minutes. I don't remember losing time, but my memories after the object disappeared are hazy, just a stretched out feeling of waiting. That night, I filed a standard report, no faults mentioned. What could I say? The next morning, one of the technicians mentioned the fault had cleared around 7:30 p.m. The voltage snapped back to normal, as if someone flipped a breaker, but no remote commands had been sent. When I asked if this was normal, We were hiking near the Trinity site, not in the fenced blast zone, but on the surrounding BLM land. Southern New Mexico's landscape stretched out before us, flat desert, dry riverbeds, and old fence posts half buried in sand. Rusting radiation warning signs still peek out from the brush. This wasn't some forbidden expedition. My girlfriend Eliza was determined to hike every marked trail in the area before year's end. The Mockingbird Gap Trail wasn't popular. No shade, no water, just featureless terrain with historical significance. We parked near the highway around 7:30 a.m., the sun already scorching in October. Our gear was minimal: water, dried fruit, first aid kit, my Garmin watch, and Eliza's GPS-enabled phone. She always liked documenting our hikes, and typically her GPS logs matched perfectly, even with spotty cell coverage. We headed east through an old cattle gate on a dirt track that once served as a Manhattan Project supply road. Nothing suggested its past, just gravel, scrub, and endless yucca plants. About an hour in, we passed a sun-dried, picked-clean dead coyote. Eliza joked it was a bad omen, saying we should have brought sage. The terrain remained flat and easy walking, with heat shimmering over the sand like water. At 3.8 miles, Eliza confirmed we were making good time. We paused briefly under the meager shade of a small rocky outcrop. The trail then sloped down into an arroyo, its earth cracked and marked with occasional animal tracks, curving toward a low ridge. That's where things became inexplicable. Walking side by side, we were quiet except for boot crunches and wind. Suddenly, we both stopped simultaneously. The silence was immediate and unnatural. Unlike typical desert quiet, this felt oppressive. No insects, no birds, no wind. The air grew heavy, almost tangible. Something was profoundly wrong, though we couldn't define what. I haven't seen anything like that again. The structure remains in the same spot, and I've returned since. Nothing weird happened on subsequent visits, but I still can't explain what we experienced that day. We were walking when Eliza suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I didn't hear anything at first. A dry ridge stretched about 30 yards off the trail to our right. Something metallic, like a chain dragging, might have caught my attention, or maybe not. I nodded anyway. We stood listening for half a minute. Nothing dramatic happened, but something changed. The light seemed to flatten, as if the sun had ducked behind clouds, except there were no clouds. We started walking again without really deciding to, moving like nothing unusual had occurred. The wind returned first, just a slight breeze making the brush sway. Then heat washed over me suddenly, as if I'd stepped back into a different temperature zone. Looking around, I noticed the arroyo looked deeper. The ridge ahead seemed closer than it should have been. Eliza was now 20 feet in front of me, squinting at her phone. She called back, asking if we'd missed a turn. When I caught up, she showed me the GPS track. The blue line had inexplicably skipped. One moment we were half a mile back, the next we were a mile further along. No gradual drift, just an abrupt jump. My Garmin showed the same anomaly. Exactly 58 minutes were missing. No heart rate, no elevation data, no pace information. 1 second I was walking at 3.2 miles per hour, the next, nothing. Then everything resumed normally, as if nothing had interrupted our hike. We stared at our screens bewildered. The sky looked unchanged. We felt fine, no dizziness, no headaches. Maybe it's a GPS bug, I suggested, but two devices showing the exact same gap didn't feel right. We turned back. An odd silence descended. The wind sounded muffled, distant. Our steps echoed strangely. Halfway back, Eliza stopped and pointed to something in the sand. A metal rod about 2 feet long, angled upward like an antenna. I thought it might be old survey equipment, but as we approached, I realized it was just a thin, dull gray cylinder stuck in the ground, attached to nothing. We were camping up near the Terry Mountains in Colorado. 4 of us, me, Sean, Greg, and Chris, had taken Friday off work and driven up early to claim a good spot. It was late September, right after the leaves started turning, but before winter could set in. We parked off a dirt road in Pike National Forest, hiked about half a mile, and set up camp near a shallow ridge overlooking a valley. This wasn't an official campground, just a clearing we'd discovered years ago and kept returning to. No cell signal, no people, just wind in the trees and the sound of our own footsteps. By the time we got the tents up and a fire going, darkness had fallen. We made dinner, passed around bourbon, and shared our usual stories. Sean played old Wilco tracks on his Bluetooth speaker at low volume. Around midnight, we all turned in. The sky was clear, the air crisp, with every star visible. I woke around 3:30, I know because I checked my watch. My sleeping bag felt too warm, and I needed to relieve myself. The fire had burned down to embers, and everything was absolutely still. No wind, no insects, just that deep mountain silence that feels almost tangible. Later, something caught our attention. A strange object embedded into the earth with no markings. When she reached for it, I unexpectedly said, "Don't." I can't explain why, I just didn't want her touching it. My stomach tightened, and the air suddenly felt oppressively hot. We took a few pictures, but glare made them useless. We marked the spot on her app, but when we checked later, the pin had vanished. Back at the car, we both felt inexplicably exhausted, far more than our 8-mile trek on flat land should have caused. I checked the dash cam's timestamp. We should have returned around noon, but it was 1:17 p.m. Neither of us remembered stopping. No food break, no rest, just a missing hour. That night we attempted to upload the GPS data to her laptop. The files were intact, but zooming in on the gap revealed only empty space. No time codes, just a clean cut. I exported the data and opened it in a text editor. The file jumped from 10:43:12 to 11:40 with no error, no corruption, as if nothing had happened. We haven't hiked that area since. The strangest part? We've never experienced GPS issues anywhere else, even in more remote locations. Just that one stretch. 1 hour we can't remember. 1 mile we didn't walk. I stepped out of the tent and walked uphill to our usual lookout rock. The whole western ridge stretched out before me, with forest sloping down into the valley. It was colder than I'd expected, my breath heavy in the crisp air. That's when I saw the light. Not moving, just hovering above the ridge about a quarter mile away, right above the tree line. It was a soft white glow, almost spherical but not quite perfect. No beam, no flicker, just hanging completely still. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but there was no sound, not even a hum. And it was massive, at least the size of a car, maybe larger. I watched it for a full minute. It didn't pulse or shift, just sat there above the ridge like something was waiting. Curious, I went back to the tents and found Sean. "Hey," I whispered, nudging his tent. "You need to see this." Grumbling, he emerged in his jacket. "What?" I point to the ridge, lining up the light with a familiar notch in the trees. But it was gone. Only stars filled the thin black line where the light had been moments before. Sean squinted. "You sure you weren't dreaming?" "No way," I insisted. "It wasn't a star. It was hovering. Maybe a plane," he suggested, yawning. "Planes don't just stop midair like that." He wasn't convinced. "Well, nothing's there now. Come back to bed before you freeze." I spent another few minutes scanning the tree line, even climbing back to the rock. Silence and dark forest were all that remained. Sleep didn't come easily that night. At breakfast the next morning, I mentioned the incident. Greg joked about bourbon-induced hallucinations. Chris wondered if it might have been a weather balloon. I repeated what I knew. No sound, no movement, no blinking. They brushed it off, but I couldn't shake the memory as we hiked toward Goose Creek Trail. My eyes kept drifting back to the ridge, searching for any sign of that strange, motionless light. The night was cold, and we had built a bigger fire to keep warm. Everyone turned in around 11, but I stayed up, poking at the embers and staring at the ridge. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I saw the light again. It was in the same spot as before, same shape, same eerie silence. But this time, it wasn't stationary. The light moved slowly, almost drifting left to right along the ridge's curve. I watched, carefully tracking its progress by using reference points. So gradual was its movement that I had to focus intently to confirm it was actually moving. At one point, it dipped lower, just above the tree line, before rising again. Desperate to have someone else witness this, I woke Chris. Annoyed, he followed me to the flat rock where I pointed out the light. "It's moving right above those pines," I insisted. Chris stared hard, then shook his head. "I don't see anything. It's just stars. You're freaking yourself out." I was certain. The light was clear, maybe 200 or 300 feet above the ridge. But Chris didn't believe me. He went back to his tent, dismissing my claims. The moment he left, the light stopped moving. It hovered for about 10 seconds, then slowly dimmed, not like it flew away, but more as if it was turning itself off. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I didn't see the light again, not on the final night or during our hike out. But something strange happened when I got home. I'd taken numerous photos during the trip, of the camp, trees, and trail. I was sure I'd been using my phone a lot, especially that second night when I tried to zoom in on the ridge. I thought I'd definitely recorded something. Yet when I checked my gallery, only first-day photos remained. Nothing from the second night, no images after 7 p.m. Friday, no videos at all. I assumed I'd simply forgotten to record or save the files. But then Sean sent group photos, and one showed me at the campfire that night, phone raised toward the ridge as if filming something. Despite searching, even checking hidden folders on my laptop, I never found those files. The others don't discuss it. I was hauling a load of concrete forms out of Sacramento, heading east on Highway 50 through Nevada. It was close to midnight in early March, and the temperature had plummeted after sunset. A low, steady wind cut across the empty flats, and I hadn't seen another vehicle in about 30 miles. This route was familiar to me. The landscape was nothing but sagebrush and endless miles, with a wide bend where the desert briefly opens up before narrowing near the Pancake Range. No towns for hours in either direction, unless you count Austin, and that's barely more than a gas station and diner. Around mile marker 132, something caught my attention. Two dim, round lights appeared in my rearview mirror, almost amber in color, sitting about 100 yards behind me and low to the ground. Initially, I thought they might be fog lights from another vehicle, but they remained consistently distant, almost as if they were matching my speed precisely. I tried some standard checks. A tap of the brakes revealed no change. The road stretched straight ahead with no shoulder, just a soft, sandy drop-off. I planned to use one of the rare gravel cutouts to let whoever was behind me pass, but 5 miles later, the lights remained exactly the same, not gaining, not falling back. I radioed on multiple channels, 19, 13, and 9, hoping to reach another trucker. Nothing but static answered me. A strange pressure began building behind my eyes, similar to the sensation of driving at high altitude. I cracked the window, and sharp, dry, cold air rushed in. The lights behind me blinked once, not like a signal, just a single pulse, then returned to their steady glow. Another mile passed. The desert to my left looked flat enough to potentially pull off, but with a full load, I wasn't about to risk getting stuck. I hit the brakes harder this time, downshifting and slowing the truck. The mysterious lights behind me slowed in perfect synchronization. The highway stretched out before me, a long, empty ribbon cutting through the darkness. The truck's headlights carved a path, and in my mirror, another vehicle maintained a steady 100 yards behind. Something felt off. Not fear exactly, but that unsettling stillness that signals something's wrong. A cutout appeared, wide enough for 2 trucks to squeeze past each other. Gravel packed solid beneath my tires. I pulled in, hazards blinking, The mirror showed nothing following. I checked the passenger side. The road was empty. Lights vanished. Engine off, I stepped into the dust. Wind whispered across the open landscape. Walking back along the trailer, I scanned the highway. Silence. No lights, no engines, just darkness and the soft rustle of brush. Crouching, I examined the sand near the cutout's edge. No tire tracks. Not mine, not anyone else's. I stood listening, then climbed the cab's step and turned slowly, surveying the land. Nothing moved. No distant lights, just a faint orange glow low on the horizon where the last town had been. Back inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. The dash clock read 12:42. I could have sworn only minutes had passed since pulling over, but the last mile marker had shown 12:17. Easing back onto the road, I drove. No other vehicles appeared for 2 hours. Near Eureka, I stopped at a 24-hour Sinclair for coffee. I asked the cashier about late-night construction crews or convoy vehicles. She said no one worked nights out there, too remote. Arriving at my drop in Ellery the next morning, the receiver noted I was nearly an hour late. My log showed no delays, no unusual timestamps. GPS hadn't flagged any long stops, but I remembered the gravel, the cold, that specific spot. Days later in Reno, I reviewed the dashcam footage. Everything looked normal. My truck, the road, nothing behind me. But for 12 minutes, the video went fuzzy. Not full static, just interference. The morning started like any other. I was out checking the cattle around dawn, coffee in hand, after a night of dry thunder and lightning that had knocked out the power for a few hours. Our land sits outside Stamford, Texas. Been in the family for 4 generations. Just open pasture with a few mesquite groves running about 60 head of black Angus. When I crossed the east field, something caught my eye. A perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, looked like someone had dragged a black rug onto the grass. At first, I thought it might be storm damage, maybe a lightning strike. But as I got closer, something felt off. The grass inside the circle was completely gone. Not burned in any normal way, just singed down to brittle stubs, dead right to the dirt. Outside the circle, everything was untouched. No discoloration, no debris. The soil was damp from the storm, and strangely, no tracks or footprints were visible. I bent down and touched the center. The dirt felt warm, like it had been baked differently from the surrounding ground. Looking up, there was nothing unusual, just blue sky and a few clouds drifting west. I walked the circle's edge multiple times. It was dead even, not a single wobble. Out here, you don't see perfect geometry like that. Back at the house, I grabbed my phone to take pictures. Later, when I tried to upload them, they looked weird. Not glitched, but dull and grayish. The camera seemed unable to capture the contrast. The burned grass looked the same color as the soil, even though my eyes saw something different. From 12:30 to 12:42, there was this blur, like a heat distortion. You could hear the engine idling, the wind, nothing else. No tire tracks behind me. I didn't tell anyone that day. The strange events started small. A patch of grass that wouldn't recover, like something had burned it out in an unnatural way. I've been around long enough to know rural landscapes can be unpredictable, so I waited to see if it would bounce back. It didn't. The cattle were the first real sign something was off. They'd always grazed freely across that field, but now they were giving the area a wide berth. I watched one cow approach, then suddenly back away, not in panic, but with a cautious hesitation, as if something was fundamentally wrong. One clear moonlit night, I walked out to investigate. The moment I reached the circle's edge, my body hummed with an odd sensation. It wasn't sound, exactly, more like a vibration deep in my chest, similar to standing near a powerful speaker, except no music was playing. When I stepped into the center, everything went dead silent. No bugs, no breeze, no distant coyote calls. The stars were visible in every direction, but it felt like I was under some invisible dome. I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Gus during one of our feed runs. He recalled a similar incident back in '97, a smaller burn near his horse stalls that he never explained. We didn't discuss it further. That week, something felt off at home. I couldn't sleep properly. The windows seemed too exposed, and I started locking doors earlier than usual, with a persistent sense that something was out of place. Then the lights began. Not lightning, a quick bluish flash that illuminated the entire field like a camera's strobe. I checked everything. transformers, breakers, power lines, but found nothing unusual. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was on the front porch, watching a low horizon pulse of light that appeared briefly and vanished without a sound. Using binoculars, I scanned the eastern pasture. At first, nothing. But then something shifted, not moved exactly, but rippled, like a cold heat shimmer that didn't quite make sense. The first sign something was off came from the burn circle. It appeared silently, hovering about 10 feet above the ground, barely perceptible for maybe 4 seconds before vanishing. When I walked out the next morning, everything looked undisturbed. No tracks, no broken grass, nothing to suggest anything had landed. The circle remained exactly the same, with no signs of growth. A week later, I decided to investigate by digging into the soil. The top layer crumbled like ash, despite no recent rain. About 5 inches down, the dirt transformed into something hard and dry like clay, completely different from the soil I knew so well. I brought a sample to a testing contact in Abilene. His analysis revealed something bizarre. The pH levels were extreme, with patches of alkalinity and acidity mixing like oil and water. He asked if I was growing anything unusual, but I stayed quiet. The circle persisted through the entire season. Nothing would grow inside it. Weeds avoided the area, and even the cattle gave it a wide berth. One morning, I found a jackrabbit dead just outside the circle's edge. No wounds, no blood, just lying there with lifeless, open eyes. Gradually, grass began creeping back around the perimeter, but the circle remained, lighter now, more brown than black, yet still visible like a permanent scar on the landscape. I never reported it. Who would I even call about something so strange? Instead, I started using other pastures more frequently. I'd occasionally check the east field, but I stopped walking out there much. The wind felt different near that spot, and my dogs refused to go past the gate. In the early morning hours before sunrise, I'd sometimes catch those faint flashes again, distant, but always in the same location. My experience with strange phenomena began during my 2-year stint at a remote weather station in northeast Washington, starting in 2018. Located about 20 meters west of Republic, nestled in the Kettle River Range near the Canadian border, the station was an isolated 2-room outbuilding with a radio tower and ground sensors. We worked rotating shifts, always ensuring someone was on site to monitor readings and conduct manual checks if automated systems detected anything unusual. I'm Nate. The previous shift worker was a woman named Carly. We typically overlapped for a few hours during handovers, but this particular shift was different. She had to leave early for a family commitment, leaving me alone from around 4 p.m. It was mid-September. The week had been typical for this season, with mornings shrouded in thick fog, intermittent rain, and low clouds lingering well into the night. Around 11 p.m., I'd finished my routine tasks, logging reports and calibrating sensors. While reading on my tablet, something caught my attention. The wind monitor suddenly spiked from 4 to 19 miles per hour in under 10 seconds, then immediately dropped back. Curious, I peered out the window. The trees seemed undisturbed. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. Everything appeared normal. No fallen branches, no wildlife near the sensors. The wind had returned to its calm state. About 30 minutes later, I went out for a smoke. The weather station sat in a small clearing, surrounded by dense pine forest. The tower stood just north of the building, with nothing but trees and sky in view. As I looked up, 3 perfectly positioned red lights hung motionless within the clouds. These weren't typical aircraft lights. I knew every structure in the area, and the only other tower with red lights was miles away. These lights were different, dim but distinct, hovering just above the tree line. They didn't blink or move, just sat there in an exact triangular formation. I watched, transfixed, for what felt like an eternity. Walking further into the clearing, I tried to get a better view. The lights remained absolutely stationary. When I reached for my phone to capture the moment, the screen was dead, strange since it had been fully charged earlier. I attempted to reset the device. Nothing worked. Inside, I grabbed my tablet, hoping to document what I was seeing. The screen lit up, but the camera app froze on a black screen. Through the door, I kept my eyes fixed on those unmoving lights, still hanging precisely where I'd first spotted them. The night started quietly enough. 3 faint red spots glowed through the low cloud cover, forming a perfect triangle. No sound, no vibration, just these strange lights hanging in the sky. Around 10 minutes later, they vanished completely. Not gradually, not flying away, but instantly. One moment they were there, the next, the sky was empty. The heavy clouds remained, but the lights had disappeared without a trace. I walked back into the clearing, searching for any sign through breaks in the cloud cover. Nothing. An eerie silence had fallen, even the insects had gone quiet. About 20 minutes later I checked again. The fog had grown thicker, and a cold front seemed to have moved in. Looking up, I noticed something unusual with our tower lights. They were flickering oddly, not turning off, not dimming, but pulsing like a strobe. This was strange. That tower had been rock-solid reliable during my entire time working here. I called the main station in Spokane to report. The call connected normally, but the supervisor insisted our equipment showed no irregularities. I stayed awake, repeatedly checking the window. The lights never reappeared. The next morning, I inspected the tower base thoroughly. Everything looked normal. No loose wiring, no interference readings. I ran a full diagnostic, which passed all checks. My phone and tablet powered on perfectly. The phone at 76% battery, with no signs of any crash. The camera worked fine. When Carly returned a week later, I said nothing. I simply reported that everything had run smoothly, suggesting the wind spike was likely just a microburst. Later, I checked the logbooks. No mention of red lights or any outages. About a month afterward, while reviewing archived satellite weather images from that night, something caught my eye. Around 11:30 p.m., one frame showed a faint triangular blur in the cloud layer over our coordinates. It wasn't bright, just a subtle distortion, like something massive had briefly disrupted the moisture pattern before vanishing. The next frame was completely normal. I saved a screenshot to an old flash drive and haven't looked at it since. I was out near Shiprock, New Mexico, doing drone surveys for a geology team mapping erosion zones before a pipeline company pushed through a new road. My days usually involved grid scans and image passes, turning the data into topographic maps later. I'd rented a small trailer in town and drove out to the desert each morning, making sure to start early before the heat could drain the drone's battery life. That morning felt off from the start. My phone struggled to hold a signal, not uncommon, but still strange. Then my laptop refused to recognize the GPS dongle, forcing me to restart everything twice before the drone software would even launch. Mid-June, the desert was dry and cloudless, with no wind to speak of. I set up my ground station in the truck bed like any other day. Antenna on a tripod, laptop on a cooler, battery pack underneath. The drone was a fixed-wing VTOL, resembling a white glider with massive 6-foot rotors. At 6:30 a.m., I launched it on a 9-kilometer sweep along the plateau's base. The first 15 minutes seemed completely normal. I watched the first-person view feed on the main screen with map telemetry alongside. But around waypoint 6, something changed. The video started glitching differently than usual. Interference typically causes pixelation or freezing, but this was strange. A horizontal ripple shivered across the screen for a second before cutting to black. Oddly, I didn't lose drone control or GPS signal. Telemetry continued streaming perfectly, just without video. Then suddenly, the feed snapped back on. For a split second, something darted across the screen, metallic, silvery, oval-shaped, moving impossibly fast from right to left. No rotors, no wings. I blurted out a shocked, "What the hell?" and tried to rewind the buffer, but the object had vanished. The screen showed a clean jump from black to normal video. I stared, wondering if my eyes had tricked me, but I knew what I'd seen. Something had moved, something unexplainable. I paused the mission and began bringing the drone back, my mind racing with questions about what had just happened. I hovered the drone over the red rock landscape, scanning the terrain with manual camera control. After the previous day's odd incident, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings. I checked the ADS-B for any nearby aircraft, nothing except a private jet cruising at 32,000 feet from Flagstaff. When I reviewed the flight log later, something was off. The section where the video feed had cut out was completely missing. The timestamps jumped seamlessly, as if those few seconds had been surgically removed. This shouldn't happen. Even with signal interference, The onboard memory should preserve the raw footage. I transferred the SD card to my laptop and ran checks. Recovery software found nothing. The file structure appeared normal, but those seconds were gone without a trace. I uploaded the scan set to my client without mentioning anything unusual. The next morning, I returned to the same location, not out of necessity, but curiosity. I wanted to see if anything strange would happen again. Midway through the flight, the compass reading drifted 20 degrees for no apparent reason. No wind, no magnetic anomalies on the USGS maps. Then it corrected itself. Suddenly, the live video froze. Not a glitch, a complete standstill for 4 seconds. When it resumed, the camera angle had shifted 15 degrees despite the drone maintaining its original heading. No turbulence, no manual intervention. The gimbal calibration checked out perfectly back at the trailer. 3 nights later, I was jolted awake by an unusual buzzing. It wasn't a phone vibration, but a deep, resonant tremor that seemed to penetrate the trailer's walls. Something felt different. Something felt wrong. The morning was quiet when he arrived, well before sunrise, an unusual time for anyone to show up at the small Sanders, Oklahoma police station. I'd been working the night shift, and the station wasn't much. A front desk, 2 holding cells, and 3 desks in the back. The last call had been hours ago, around 11, and I was finishing up paperwork when the door buzzer sounded. I expected it might be another report about a stray cow, typical for our town of 900 people. But the man standing there was someone I'd never seen before, rare in a place this small. He looked around 60, maybe older, with weathered skin and a gray beard. His outfit was a mix of faded jeans, a button-up shirt, and boots with a mismatched belt. Everything about him seemed worn but not dirty, neither homeless nor completely out of place, just slightly off. He stood silently at first, squinting through the glass. When I unlocked the door and asked if he was okay, he scanned the hallway behind me, then nodded slowly. Something was going to be reported. Later, I'd think about the night before, the strange experience out by the ridge. The sky had been clear, with a half moon and no wind. To the north, 3 soft orange lights hovered in a triangle formation. They remained motionless for about 10 seconds before fading out, one by one. The last light lingered briefly before shooting straight up with such speed it seemed unreal. No sound accompanied the movement. The next morning, I'd driven to the ridge and walked the area, leaving my drone in the truck. About 300 feet from the bluff's edge, I discovered something peculiar. A perfect 6-foot-wide circle pressed into the dirt. It wasn't burned, just flattened as if something heavy had evenly compressed the ground before vanishing. No tire tracks, footprints, or debris were visible. I checked the soil, just compacted sand and gravel with no moisture or chemical staining. I didn't report it. What would I say? These were just oddities, unexplained glitches that don't appear in official logs. The remaining weeks of the contract passed without incident. I completed the scans, packed up, and left. Even now, I sometimes review the footage, noting the missing frame segment and the strange angle shift. I know what I saw, even if I can't explain why the evidence disappeared. His voice was dry, a little hoarse. Something was over my house. I led him to the front counter, trying to understand what was going on. He didn't answer when I asked if he lived in town. Instead, he talked about lights, bright ones, high up in the sky. At first, I thought it might be the power company, but he insisted it wasn't a helicopter, just white and orange lights, pulsing silently. He rubbed his temples while I took out a form and clicked my pen. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Tonight, I think," he replied. Hen things got strange. When I asked his name, he hesitated. "I'm not sure," he finally said. I set my pen down, confused. He quickly added that he knew things, who the president was, what year it was. But when he asked if it was 2004, I told him it was 22. He went quiet, blinking like he thought I was joking. I started asking standard questions. Any medication? Drinking? ID? He shook his head to everything. His pockets were nearly empty. Just an old key straight, no phone, no wallet. His shirt had a Sears brand tag I hadn't seen in years. I radioed dispatch about recent missing persons reports. Nothing matched. Slowly, he started describing a memory. A porch with peeling green paint, a rocking chair, sunlight filtering through trees, lighting up the backyard like daytime. I couldn't get more details. He seemed lost, uncertain. I asked about family or friends who could vouch for him. He didn't know. I brought him water. When the day shift arrived, I handed the case to Deputy Marks, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. That afternoon, I called Stillwater Regional. They ran his prints, no matches in any database. Over the next few days, we tried everything. He was never aggressive, just perpetually confused. What was most unsettling was how calm he seemed, almost like he'd accepted his total lack of identity. We kept him in a holding cell overnight for safety. The local pastor even offered him a cot at the church. But the weirdest part was yet to come that Friday. We started asking around town, passing his photo to everyone we knew. We hoped someone might recognize him, maybe a relative or old acquaintance, but nobody knew him. Not at the local diner, not at the feed store, not even at the VFW where the older folks gathered. The strange thing was, he didn't look like an outsider. His face suggested he belonged here. Someone who might have coached Little League or fixed tractors for the Coopers, yet no one could place him. The next morning, I drove him out to an area he'd mentioned after looking at an old aerial map. He pointed to a dirt road near Lake Otis, saying, "I think I lived down that road." We drove down the gravel path, passing abandoned properties with rusted trailers and overgrown lots. When we reached a small cinder block house with a collapsed porch and a metal shed, he went silent. "This is it," he said quietly. I helped him out of the cruiser. He walked slowly, scanning the area as if expecting someone to appear. Stepping over broken boards, he went around back. An old clothesline and a large oak tree with black scorch marks caught his attention. He stared at the tree for a long time, and I didn't interrupt. Later that night, I dug through county records. The property belonged to Edgar Thorne, who died in 1996 with no surviving family. I found his photos, the same face, just younger. When I showed him the picture the next morning, he simply said, "That's me." We verified his identity through veterans records. Edgar had been an Army mechanic, discharged in '79, with no history of mental illness or criminal activity. He was officially declared dead after a house fire supposedly caused by faulty wiring. Showing him the death certificate, I watched him sit motionless. "I remember waking up outside," he eventually said, "lying in the grass, everything silent, just the tree smoking." That was all he would share. We contacted the VA to arrange for a social worker to help him. Last October, I was camping solo in Death Valley, just off Warm Springs Canyon Road. Not because I'm an off-grid loner, but because I needed quiet. My job had been crushing me all year, and sleep had become a rare luxury. That stretch of open desert always helped me breathe again. No phone service, no people, just dry air and endless space. I arrived late that afternoon, parking my truck on a raised spot and pitching the tent before making a Buick dinner. The night was unusually warm for October, maybe mid-70s, with no wind. The air felt completely still. Around 9:30 or 10, unable to sleep, I decided on a short walk. I didn't venture far, just followed the wash heading southeast. Flashlight in one hand, Nalgene in the other. The moon was just past half, bright enough that I barely needed the light. After about 15 minutes of slow walking, I stopped for no particular reason. The silence was profound, the kind that makes your ears ring. Looking up, the sky was crystal clear. Death Valley offers a view of stars most people never see. I always enjoyed spotting satellites, those predictable dots crawling across the sky. But one star was different. Brighter, almost bluish, not twinkling like the others. It didn't resemble Venus or Jupiter, sitting motionless above the southern ridgeline. Then it began to drift downward, slowly and smoothly. No wobble, no arc, just a steady descent. I stood frozen, watching. After about 10 seconds it paused, hovering just a finger width above the horizon. Suddenly, it shot straight upward, faster than anything I've ever seen in the sky. Later, I met with someone about this experience. He agreed to go to Tulsa for further evaluation. He thanked me before leaving, shaking my hand with a sense of peace. I still don't understand what happened, but I know what I saw, and I know nobody in town knew his name. The desert stretched out, silent and still. Nothing like the Air Force drills near Edwards. Something had vanished into the sky as if pulled by an invisible string, leaving me frozen in place. Hours later, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe a drone, an atmospheric anomaly, or a shooting star, though none of those explanations truly fit. The absolute stillness was unnerving. No wind, no engine noise, just complete silence. As I headed back to my tent, something felt off. The wash I'd followed earlier looked different. Boulders seemed misplaced, and the slope felt steeper than I remembered. Sweeping my flashlight in a slow circle, I searched for the Chiron landmark I'd passed earlier, but it was gone. I figured I'd simply wandered slightly off course and began to backtrack. Yet with each step, the wrongness intensified. At one point, the sand beneath my feet changed dramatically, coarse and fine, almost like crushed glass that had been melted and rapidly cooled. I crouched down, scooping up a handful that sparkled like black sugar in my flashlight's beam. This terrain was familiar to me, and this texture didn't belong. My old Garmin GPS refused to lock, endlessly searching. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic clicking, like an old light switch being repeatedly flipped. I killed my light and crouched behind a rock. The sound came from about 20 yards ahead, moving in a circular pattern, then abruptly stopping. Silence returned. I remained motionless, my knees aching from the prolonged crouch. When I finally stood, I moved cautiously, trying to retrace my steps. Checking ridge lines and using stars for orientation, nothing felt right. Eventually, my truck's reflective window caught the moonlight. I was shocked at how far off course I'd wandered. What seemed like a 15-minute walk had taken nearly 40 minutes to return. Back at camp, everything appeared untouched, except the truck. The passenger door was slightly ajar, just barely open. I never leave it like that. Standing there, I tried to recall if I might have accidentally left it open earlier, but I couldn't remember. Here's the rewritten text. My radar work at Nellis in 1994 was mostly routine. I was 38 years old then, an E6 with 17 years of experience, handling radar maintenance and diagnostics. Sometimes I'd monitor late-night flight scopes during quiet shifts. This particular Tuesday in October was different. We'd been told to expect classified testing near Groom that week. Nothing unusual for us. Aircraft would often route through Tonopah's radar coverage, and our job was simple: log and report without asking questions. Black project protocols were clear. Daniels, a new guy from Edwards, was with me in the radar control van that night. Around 200, we were running a standard systems test, checking sweep ranges and looking for ghost returns. Halfway through logging, something caught my eye. A single return blinked onto the screen, right at the edge of Groom Lake airspace. No transponder. Altitude, 30,000 feet. Initially, I assumed it was an equipment glitch, not uncommon when the scope overheats during long sweeps, but then it happened. The blip moved instantaneously. No gradual descent, no arc, just a sudden jump from 30,000 feet to ground level in a single sweep, right in the middle of restricted airspace. Later, after that night, strange details lingered. My truck showed signs of someone's presence, the driver's seat slightly reclined, unfamiliar oily fingerprints on the windshield. My GPS had been acting up during that trip through an unmarked wash. Weeks later, back home, I found a small black, glassy pebble under the passenger seat. I hadn't collected any rocks. After a few days on my desk, I threw it away. We were tracking something on the radar that caught my attention. I asked Daniels if it was a skip, but he didn't think so. When I backed up the sweep log, I realized this was different. The return had substance, a complete signature with depth, Doppler readings. It wasn't random noise or a weather artifact. This had structure. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished from the screen. We ran comprehensive systems diagnostics. Everything checked out perfectly. Clean power, no magnetic interference, all systems functioning normally. I pulled the signal log from the previous half hour and replayed it. The result was identical. One clear high-altitude hit, an immediate drop to ground level, and then nothing. Daniels remained silent, and I leaned back, staring at the blank screen. We logged it as a low-priority transient anomaly, with no associated flight plan. The next morning changed everything. 2 civilian contractors arrived, both wearing suits and carrying restricted credentials. An older man with salt and pepper hair, lacking a name badge, asked me to detail what I'd observed. I walked him through the details and showed the printouts. His reaction was telling. No surprise, minimal questions, just a knowing nod. Consistent, he said, as if this were routine. Then came the unexpected request: delete the signal logs. When I hesitated, he produced a Department of Defense authorization form already signed. I complied. In the following days, our radar van underwent calibration. When it returned, the memory storage had been replaced, and all signal archives from that night had vanished. I understood the unspoken message and kept quiet. 3 nights later, something else happened. Around 300 hours in the cold stillness of a low 40s night, I was walking between the van and communications building. The silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, just an eerie quiet that seemed to hum in my ears. Looking toward the south end of the range, where Groom Lake's airspace begins, I saw a bright white light hovering about half a mile above ground. Motionless. Not blinking, not moving. Our flight bands confirmed it wasn't any known aircraft. For perhaps 20 seconds, it remained suspended. Then, without sound, it began rising vertically and simply disappeared. Not fading, not flying away, just gone. The next morning, Daniels handed me a sealed envelope. I was Raone Diaz, working surveillance out of the Lordsburg station in New Mexico back in 2016. 6 years into the job, I mostly ran night shifts, monitoring desert stretches west of Las Cruces. Our setup was straightforward. Mobile towers with pan-tilt zoom cameras mounted on extendable masts, thermal and infrared equipped, parked on ridges scanning wide desert arcs. Mid-July, around 2 a.m., one of those nights where heat never really dropped, high 80s even after midnight, dry air thick in your throat. My partner Alex Trujillo and I were manning a forward tower near Animas. The landscape was flat, broken by low ridges and scrub, nothing but creosote and hard-packed sand in every direction. We'd set up the tower at dusk and parked the truck in a small cut below. The night was mostly quiet. A few jackrabbits, a small group moving northeast that we called in. A team picked them up easily. Then silence returned. Around 2:10, I was watching the infrared feed while Alex rested in the truck. The camera was scanning low on the eastern horizon, tracing a shallow wash. Suddenly, it pinged something. A heat source rising slowly from the darkness. I initially thought coyote or mule deer, but something wasn't right. Whatever it was standing upright, walking, and incredibly hot. Years later, long after retirement, I requested my service records out of curiosity. My Tonopah assignment was listed, but that week's radar logs were mysteriously missing. The entire stretch blacked out. I still remember that blip, 30,000 feet to zero in less than a second. No arc, no trail, just there and then not. I've never seen anything like it before or since. My last memory from Tonopah was a nondescript envelope. No name, just my clearance level. Inside, a short memo stating my assignment had ended early, effective immediately, with orders to rotate back to Nellis. No explanation provided. I packed up that afternoon and never saw Daniels again. I don't know if he stayed or was moved. Body temperature was warm, but the feed showed a white-hot image, like something fresh from an oven. At first, just a distant shimmer. Barely visible, but as it drew closer, around 200 yards from the lens, the shape became more defined. 2 arms, 2 legs, head forward. Definitely human-shaped, but something was off. The proportions seemed wrong. Legs stretched too long, arms hanging unnaturally low, and its movement defied normal human motion. No natural sway or bounce, just an unsettling smoothness. When I tried to lock the camera, the auto track froze. The screen flickered briefly before returning to view. Now it was much closer. Impossibly close. This thing had covered 100 yards in what couldn't have been more than 2 seconds. Backing out of the zoom, I suspected a system glitch. Checking the secondary wide-angle feed revealed nothing. Only the infrared camera caught its heat signature. The night vision cam showed nothing. I radioed Alex, urgently calling him to look. No immediate response. So I ran to the truck, about 30 feet from the tower's base. He was just waking up, rubbing his face. I explained something strange was approaching from the south wash. He followed me to the monitor, but by then, it had vanished, completely gone. Rewinding the feed confirmed what I'd seen. A shape moving up from the frame's edge, glowing like heated steel. Just before entering the secondary cam's view, it stopped, crouched, the only way I could describe the movement. A sudden squat. Then the image warped with static. The next frame, nothing. It didn't walk away, it didn't fall, it simply disappeared. Alex thought I was joking. I insisted he check the system logs. They were clean. No errors, no signal loss. We stepped outside, scanning the desert with binoculars. Absolute silence surrounded us. No wind, no insects, just that eerie quiet that makes your ears ring. Deciding to investigate, I drove the truck to the area where the figure had appeared, about 300 yards from the tower. We used thermal scopes and side-mounted lights. The ground was flat, hard-packed, with no brush tall enough to provide cover. No footprints, not even disturbed sand. Our perimeter sweep revealed nothing. We spent the rest of the shift watching that stretch, eyes fixed on the screen. The infrared worked perfectly. It picked up rabbits, even a snake slithering from a bush, but nothing resembling our earlier sighting. The next day I pulled the recording and tagged it for review. Harris watched the clip, nodded, and said he'd send it up the chain. No questions, no surprise, no further mention. A week later, I checked the archive. The night's footage had vanished, labeled as corrupted along with the backup drive. That was my last time working with that tower. Alex requested a transfer 2 months later, never explaining why. We both knew. We never spoke of it again, and no one outside the station ever heard the story. But that shape still haunts me. The way it moved, like it was just borrowing our terrain for a moment, not truly belonging. We were returning from a Death Valley trip, early October. My wife and I had spontaneously decided to take the long route through Nevada, driving at night. It had been a tough few months, and we needed this break from our routine. Somewhere between Rachel and Crystal Springs on Highway 375, I pulled off onto a dirt road. The sky was impossibly clear. No clouds, no haze, no planes, just an overwhelming number of stars. Around 9:30 or 10, well after sunset, we were about 10 miles from the restricted zone's edge. We cut the engine where the shoulder widened. The temperature had dropped to the mid-50s, but our jackets kept us comfortable. No moon, just starlight and a faint dashboard glow. We soon switched off. Standing outside, we were almost disoriented by the star density. This wasn't like Reno with its light pollution. Sophie snapped a few phone pictures that didn't turn out. I was setting up a long exposure film shot on the car's hood when she pointed and asked, "Is that Orion?" I looked. The belt's 3 stars seemed right, but everything else was off. The shoulders were misaligned, a leg was missing. It looked different. We were stargazing, but something felt off. The constellations looked strange, like a knockoff version drawn from memory. Orion, a constellation I'd known since my teenage years, seemed warped. Sophie pointed out Cassiopeia, which normally has a distinct W shape, but here the stars were too bright and slightly rearranged. Some surrounding stars had vanished completely, leaving just black emptiness. I checked my phone compass to confirm our direction. Northeast, exactly right. Then I opened SkyGuide to compare the real sky with the app's display. The mismatch was immediate and unsettling. While the app showed constellations in their usual positions, the actual sky looked subtly twisted. Sophie took my phone, rotating slowly to align the display with the stars above. Her frown deepened. "This isn't right," she said. "Everything's shifted." The stillness was unnatural. Not just quiet, but absolutely silent. No wind, no insects, not even the sound of our footsteps on gravel. The air itself seemed suspended. As we moved back to the car, the camera on the hood inexplicably slid off and crashed to the ground. No breeze, no vibration. The lens cracked. Then I saw it. Something moved overhead. Not a plane, no lights, no contrail. A faint shape drifted across the stars, strange and silent. Most bizarre was how the stars seemed to bend around it, like water flowing around a stone. Huge and slow, moving east to west, it defied explanation. Sophie hadn't noticed yet, and I stayed silent, watching. We were out there, quiet, staring up at the night sky when she froze. Her mouth hung open slightly. Something was moving overhead, a dark shape that made the stars ripple. No sound, no lights, no engines, just a slow, dark blot passing silently. Maybe 30 seconds, then gone. Inside the car, nothing worked. The dash lights stayed dark, headlights dead. The engine ran, which made no sense. I tried switches, buttons, nothing responded. Sophie grabbed my arm and pointed. A soft white light hovered about 50 feet down the road, just above the ground. No source, just floating there, steady, unmoving. I rolled the car forward slowly. The light blinked out instantly. The moment it vanished, everything electrical came back to life. Dashboard lit up, radio hummed, headlights flickered on. I drove without speaking. We passed the spot where the light had been. Nothing. No vehicle, no debris, just dry dirt and short brush. An hour of silence followed. Sophie clutched her seatbelt like she was bracing for something. My hands never left the steering wheel. At Crystal Springs, we pulled into the gas station lot. A guy was closing the convenience store, not looking our way. I checked the time, 11:47. None of it made sense. What felt like 20 or 30 minutes had somehow become nearly 2 hours. We weren't tired or hungry, just exhausted, drained. We rarely discussed that night afterward, but our memories matched perfectly. The misplaced stars, the shape that bent the sky, the unbroken silence. Weeks later, I developed the film. Only 3 exposures remained, the rest blank. The frame from that night showed something inexplicable. Not a blur, not static, just a dark stretch across the center. I worked nights as a janitor on a restricted Air Force site in Nevada from 2004 to 2006. Most people would assume I'm either lying or crazy when I talk about it, so I rarely bring it up. The truth is, I was just doing a job, cleaning floors as a subcontractor through a private firm. We went through serious vetting, background checks, polygraphs, and a tight security orientation. Every week, they'd fly us in and out from a small civilian airfield near Tanapa. We'd stay on base 4 nights with strict rules. No phones, no personal cameras, nothing with a signal. The base looked surprisingly ordinary. Standard military buildings, offices, labs, hangars, all concrete, metal, and buzzing fluorescent lights. We were assigned cleaning zones, rotating each week. Trash collection, floor waxing, restroom cleaning, typical maintenance work. But one building was different, Hangar 4C. It sat squat and square, built into the red rock with no windows and a single east side door. Not hidden, just ignored. An older janitor named Lewis warned me early on, "Don't stare at 4C. Don't ask about it. Don't go near it." I thought he was joking, until he added, "It hums." I didn't believe him at first. Then, during my 3rd month there, I heard it. One midnight, while emptying bins behind the admin building, the air was completely still. Suddenly, a low mechanical hum rose from the ground, deep and constant, like an overloaded power transformer. It had this strange vibration that seemed to tickle your ears if you stood in one spot too long. I followed the sound. It grew louder toward the rockier end of the complex, passing 2 silent hangars before approaching 4C. No lights, no vents, no external wires, just a solid matte surface. The humming was different near the black steel building. Not louder, but thicker. I could feel it in my ankles. Standing about 10 feet from the doorless entrance with its card reader and keypad, I noticed my breath fogging despite the warm mid-70s night. The air felt unnaturally cold, making my fingers tingle. I backed away, not wanting to be seen by the omnipresent cameras. I didn't mention this to Lewis at first. A few days later, while mopping floors in the communications building, he suddenly said, "Don't linger near 4C. It notices." When I asked what he meant, he cryptically replied, "Some things in there been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours." I assumed he meant old experimenting, Ental tech, but his tone lingered in my mind. The humming became intermittent. Some weeks passed without a sound, while other nights it pulsed so heavily it made me dizzy. One night I found a new hire standing near the wall at 2 a.m., hands pressed against it as if listening. When I called out, he didn't respond. I had to tap his shoulder to break his trance. He looked pale and confused, saying nothing. The following week, he was gone, quietly reassigned like so many others before him. About 6 months into my assignment, I was alone in a detached storage unit near 4C, inventorying supplies. Suddenly, the humming intensified. Metal shelving rattled violently. Then the overhead lights flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. Emergency exit signs glowed weakly, their batteries seemingly failing. I waited, thinking it was a simple power issue. But then I realized the air system had gone silent. Only the hum remained. When I stepped outside, something was immediately wrong with the sky. The stars weren't clouded, but their pattern was distorted. Orion looked mirrored, as if twisted by an unseen hand. The entire base was dark. No windows glowed, no spotlights pierced the night. Just that deep, persistent hum emanating from 4C. I walked back toward the main path, struggling to remain calm. I wondered if I'd missed a drill or lockdown, but no alarms broke the eerie silence. I was out in the San Juan Mountains that week, backpacking solo in late September. The nights were cold enough to frost my water filter, but the days were perfect. Blue skies, orange aspens, dry trails. I'd planned a 5-day loop off the Continental Divide, around 40 miles round trip. Solo hiking wasn't new to me. I'd done the Wind River Range the year before. But this time felt different from the start. I camped the first night near a shelf above Hermosa Creek, completely alone. No other hikers in sight since leaving the trailhead. Just elk tracks and bear scat scattered around. I made dinner, filtered water, and crawled into my sleeping bag by 9. It was one of those eerily still nights where everything feels muffled. No wind, no bugs, no moon. I fell asleep quickly. Then at 2:43 a.m., a time that would later stick in my memory for its odd specificity, I woke up suddenly. Not gradually, but bolt upright, as if someone had clapped right next to my ear. I listened. Nothing. No branches, no animals, no footsteps. Unzipping the tent, I poked my head out, half expecting to see a raccoon near my bear hang. Instead, a white light was moving. Months later, working at a facility near a building labeled 4C, I'd experienced something similar. Walking through dark corridors during routine announcements, I heard a strange sound beneath the usual hum. Breathing. Slow, steady inhalations like something massive was sleeping. The air felt colder than ice. I didn't linger. I went straight to the janitor's trailer and sat in darkness until the lights returned about 20 minutes later. The next morning, no one mentioned anything. When I asked Lewis, he just said, "You stayed out too long." Eventually, I was reassigned to Facility 7B, farther from the ridge. I never saw 4C again. During my final debriefing in a stark white room without clocks, a nameless official told me, "You'll sign this and never talk about what you saw." I signed, but I hadn't really seen anything, just heard it, felt it. That low hum seeming to rise from beneath the world, a cold that lingered on your skin long after you'd left. That building is probably still there, still locked, still humming. The first night, a bright light caught my eye low across the valley. It wasn't a flashlight or anything familiar, perfectly round, about the size of a basketball, hovering silently 10 feet above the creek bed. It glided slowly from east to west, and though I initially thought it might be a drone, there was no sound at all. For 30 seconds, I watched it slip behind some trees and vanish. Afterward, I spent 10 minutes trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe moonlight reflecting off something, but there was no moon. Perhaps a plane's reflection, yet it moved too low and seemed to follow the terrain in an unusual way. Eventually, I zipped the tent closed and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I dismissed the experience as imagination or a dream. I hiked about 11 miles over the pass, descending into a lower basin where aspens were already turning gold. My campsite was beside a small lake, surrounded only by grass and rock, with no sign of other people. After eating and stretching, I went to bed early as the night grew colder. Deep asleep, I suddenly awoke at 2:43 a.m., just like the previous night, alert, pulse racing, in complete silence. This time, I didn't hesitate to look outside. The orb had returned, same size and height, but closer now, about 300 yards away, moving parallel to the tree line at the ridge's base. A solid white light, unwavering and steady, moved as if it had infinite time. It didn't bob like a balloon or float like a drone. Something about its movement felt off, like it was tracing a path through an invisible landscape. I watched until it disappeared behind a stand of dead trees, never to reappear. I remained awake long after, listening to occasional leaf rustles in the breeze. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. I packed up and moved camp again, covering another 8 or 9 miles. I found myself in a narrow gulch, hemmed in by cliffs on both sides. My reasoning was simple. If this was some strange weather event, being lower might change things. Plus, I wanted to see if anything would happen with a more limited view. The night was silent. Exhausted, I fell asleep early. Suddenly, I was awake, 2:43 a.m. This time I didn't unzip the tent. I lay still, holding my breath. Nothing was visible, but the air felt electric. My skin felt tight, fingers tingling, that pre-lightning sensation, except the sky was crystal clear. I listened intently. A faint, low humming emerged from behind me across the gulch. Soft and mechanical, but not like an engine. More like a refrigerator's hum in a quiet house, only slower and deeper. It lasted maybe 20 seconds before vanishing. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and peeked out. Stars, ridge, no movement. But on the far side of the gulch, a small patch of trees glowed subtly. Not bright, just noticeable, as if lit from underneath. The glow faded within seconds. Day 4 was a blur of constant movement. I hiked hard, skipping lunch, unconsciously cutting the loop short by taking a connector trail back toward the trailhead. My plan, one more night of camping before hiking out. I chose a spot near a rock shelf overlooking a canyon. Higher ground, more visibility, no more feeling boxed in. I set up the tent in the open, wind be damned. That night, sleep was impossible. Zipped in my bag, I waited. 2:43 a.m. hit, and the tent door was already open. The orb appeared from the east this time, lower and closer, maybe 100 yards away. Same silent glide, same soft light. But something was different. A shadow beneath it, not sharp or definable. Just a blot, as if the light was reacting to something solid. It followed the orb perfectly, like connected by an invisible thread, hovering just above the ground along the same strange path. The orb paused briefly, just a moment. I was working nights at a gas station just off Route 375, a few miles outside of Rachel, Nevada. It was a tiny place, one pump island with a small convenience store. During the day, we'd get tourists heading toward the extraterrestrial highway signs in the black mailbox. But at night, it was mostly truckers, locals, and occasional long-distance drivers. My name's Cole. I'm not Ram, Nevada originally. After a tough breakup in 2017, I moved out here and ended up staying. The job wasn't great. It paid poorly, but the boss was easygoing. As long as the register balanced and the place was locked up by midnight, he didn't care what I did. Most nights followed the same routine. I'd clean coffee pots, restock drinks, then sit behind the counter watching old horror movies on my phone. We had 3 cameras, one at the door, one at the counter, and one outside above the pumps. The DVR system was cheap, grainy, and slow, but it worked. This happened in March 2022, on a Thursday night. Cold wind, no moon, the kind of night where windows sweat on the inside. I was wrapping up the register count just 15 minutes from closing when the door chime startled me. No headlights had pulled in. The guy who walked in was completely silent. No wallet, no keys, no phone. He moved slowly, like he was trying not to wake someone. Right in the middle of the store, he stopped and looked up at the security camera above the door. He wasn't crazy or strung out, just a man in his 40s, short brown hair, tan windbreaker, jeans. Totally average. But something was off. His hands stayed flat at his sides, and his neck was tilted just a little too far back. Like it hurt to hold his head that way, but he was doing it deliberately. I asked if I could help him. No response. He didn't even blink. 2 years later, I've continued backpacking, but only with friends and never in that same area again. My last solo trip ended strangely. Something shifted perspective in those woods, watching me for 4 or 5 seconds before moving back into the trees. I packed up before sunrise and hiked the final 9 miles straight through, reaching the trailhead around noon. 3 other cars were in the lot. Normal people. Nobody acting weird. I didn't say a word to anyone. The night shift was dragging on, quiet and uneventful. He stood there, motionless, staring up at the camera. I tried talking to him, thinking maybe he was deaf or confused, but he didn't respond. Not even a twitch. I walked closer, speaking directly to him, but he remained fixated on the camera, acting like I wasn't even in the room. Curious, I glanced at the monitor behind the counter. It showed 3 camera views in a grid, but something was off. The indoor cameras were nothing but static, while the outdoor pump camera displayed a clear image. I moved back behind the counter to check the DVR. It was recording normally, red light blinking, timestamp moving, no error messages. I cycled through the feeds, front door, counter, pumps. Only the pump camera showed a clear picture. The other 2 were glitching, occasionally flashing an empty store before returning to snow. He remained perfectly still, unmoving, staring at the dead camera as if waiting for something to happen. 10 minutes passed with nothing but the soft hum of refrigerator compressors in the background. My unease grew, but he wasn't threatening, just intensely strange. I hesitated to call the police for someone who hadn't actually done anything wrong. Then, abruptly, he turned and walked out. No purchase, no acknowledgement, not even a glance in my direction. He moved with purpose, like someone completing a routine task. The doorbell chimed. I looked out the window, but saw no car. The pumps were empty, and the highway was clear. I stepped outside to verify. The wind had stopped completely. No tire tracks, no footprints, not a single trace of his presence. The next morning, I told Javier, my boss, about the incident. He thought I was joking until I showed him the DVR footage. The timestamp ran normally, with semis passing by and one even stopping for gas. But the indoor cameras remained a fuzzy mess, with distorted audio that sounded like it was coming from underwater. Occasional audio spikes would crackle through. He's static. I didn't want to come out. Standing between racks of bottled water and Gatorade, I froze, listening intently. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft buzz of store lights through the open cooler door. When I finally stepped out, the place was empty. The back door, which was always stiff, had started creeping open on its own, even when I knew I'd locked it. Cooler lights would flicker with no one nearby. Sometimes the door chime went off for no reason. I'd check, thinking wind or pressure changes might trigger it, but the outside camera would show nothing, just the door swinging slightly. It began after Javier replaced the indoor cameras. He seemed creeped out and annoyed, thinking someone was trying to mess with our system. He formatted the DVR that day and swapped the 2 indoor cameras with cheap new ones from the supply shelf. The old cameras went into a drawer, never to be reinstalled. A few weeks later, the DVR started recording over that night like nothing had happened. Later, I checked the DVR from that night. All 3 cameras had recorded fine, but something was off with the door camera. The feed wasn't static or blurry, but the colors were wrong. Everything had a blue tint like floodlights. A faint distortion appeared in the lower frame, similar to heat shimmer on pavement. No figure was visible, just the door opening and slowly closing. After that incident in April around 1:15 a.m., I stopped working nights. I told Javier my schedule had to change or I'd quit. He didn't ask why, and I think he'd started feeling something was wrong too. He installed motion lights outside, replaced the chime sensor, and even had a tech guy check for wiring interference. They found nothing. If the tech returned, the cameras never caught it. My second night on a new contract job at Groom Lake in late fall 2008, I was 26, fresh out of the Navy and needing money fast. That's when I saw lights where there shouldn't have been any. I was on perimeter patrol at the south end of a restricted area with nothing sensitive on my clearance list. Just routine checks, radio contact every half hour, and strict orders to stay put. The job felt like overkill, but the paycheck made it worth it. Marcus, my partner, was a retired MP in his late 30s who'd been working this gig for 6 months. Our first meeting was brief. Rule 1, he said, if you see something strange, pent. His tone was dead serious. Night shifts dragged on in the desert. We'd drive slow loops along an 8-mile gravel road between remote sensor poles, flat, empty landscapes stretched in every direction. Technically, we weren't supposed to sleep, but everyone did. Short 10-minute naps with the engine running and windows cracked. During our second night, Marcus took the first patrol loop while I waited at Station C. The little covered area had a broken chair and a cooler of off-brand Gatorade. The wind that night was intense, dry gusts rolling in from the north. You could hear them approaching. Around 2:40 a.m., something caught my eye. A solid white light, stationary about 3 miles south of the restricted boundary. I radioed Marcus. No response. I tried again. Silence. Then the light started moving. Slow, horizontal, maybe 30 or 40 feet up. No sound, which was strange. Even with the wind, I should have heard something. A motor, a hum, but there was nothing. I thought maybe it was a drone, but something felt off. I stepped out behind the truck door. The light kept coming, closing the distance. I knew I should report it, but Marcus's voice echoed in my head. Pretend you didn't. The light stopped about a mile out, just hovering. It wasn't like a normal light source, more like a glowing sphere. No beam, no flicker, just suspended in midair. I tried the radio again. Marcus, you copy? Static. Then a weird pop. The radio crackled with static, like a speaker unplugged. Jing mid-song. His voice was low and urgent. Stay in the truck. Don't look at it. When I asked where he was, only more interference answered. Then silence. I backed into the truck and shut the door, not starting the engine. Just sitting, staring through the windshield. The light hadn't moved, but something nearby had changed. The ground looked different, a shimmer, like heat waves on a cold pavement. I killed my flashlight and watched, barely blinking. At first, I tried convincing myself it was a test flight, something unannounced, but the longer I stared, the more wrong everything felt. Around 3:10 it moved again, not toward or away, but straight up, vertical, slow and silent. No sound at all. It rose maybe 200 feet, then vanished completely, not fading, just gone. Darkness surrounded me for another 15 minutes until Marcus pulled up, his lights off until right behind my truck. He got out, said nothing, just leaned on the hood and lit a cigarette. When I asked what happened, he shook his head. "Don't talk about it," he warned. I mentioned I'd logged the incident. He stared hard. "You didn't see anything. You stayed in your sector. No anomalies." When I pressed further, he took a long drag and said simply, "That wasn't for us to know." We finished the shift in silence. Morning came, we handed off to the day crew and filed logs. Mine read, "Routine perimeter check, no incidents," though I'd started to write something else before stopping. The following nights were strange. The wind would die completely between 2:30 and 3. Every time I passed Station C, my radio would fuzz out for exactly 8 seconds. Not more, not less. Marcus confirmed the same thing when I mentioned it. If it doesn't ask for you, don't go looking. By week 3, I stopped asking questions. I worked there 5 months, saw that light only once more, near the end. Same location, same time. This time I didn't move, didn't touch the radio. I was driving back from my uncle's place in Monroe, heading toward my apartment in Athens. It was early October, cool but not cold, with my windows down and the radio off. Normally I'd take the main highway, but after a couple beers, I didn't want to risk catching a trooper's attention, so I took the back roads. I know the area pretty well. Lots of old farm roads with long stretches between intersections and not many streetlights. County Road 217 winds through some pretty empty country. Old chicken farms, abandoned houses, maybe a trailer or two tucked back in the trees. The road has no shoulder and is barely 2 lanes wide. I was cruising along at 45, the road's posted at 40, but nobody drives that slow, just zoning out. That's when I noticed the headlights behind me. Far back at first, just a soft glow around the bends. I figured someone else had taken the same shortcut and was catching up. Every now and then, the lights would dip over a hill or around a curve, then come back again. I didn't think anything of it initially, but then I started noticing how steady they were. No weaving, no bouncing, just locked onto me. Same distance, same brightness, no turn signals, no flickering, just smooth and steady. I tapped my brakes once, just a little, to see if they'd slow down. They didn't. The road was getting narrower. No more houses, just woods on either side. I started getting that prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like when you know someone's watching you. I decided to pull off at the next gravel driveway or pasture gate and let them pass. I saw a turnoff on the right, one of those grass clearings with a rusted cattle gate, and slowed down. As I eased onto the shoulder, something strange happened. The light, well, it vanished like before. I didn't look for it after that. I finished my contract and never went back. Marcus stayed. I heard from another guy that he was still there in 2011, working nights. Said he liked the quiet. Sometimes I think about that second night. Not just the light, but the way the ground shimmered around it. Like the space under it didn't want to be seen. Like whatever it was didn't care if you noticed, as long as you stayed where you were. I was driving along a quiet stretch of road in Georgia, my mind alert and focused. The darkness seemed to press in around me, the trees creating a tight tunnel of shadows. At first, everything appeared normal, but something felt off. I'd catch glimpses of what might have been headlights behind me, then nothing. The road twisted and climbed, winding through a landscape that felt increasingly isolated. I tried the radio, hoping for some sound to break the silence, but only static greeted me. Every station was dead, which was unusual even for this remote area. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, searching for something I couldn't quite define. Near a small intersection with a blinking yellow light, I paused longer than necessary, scanning the road behind me. Still nothing. But just as I turned left, a pale shape flickered in the mirror. Not headlights, just a vague blur that vanished as quickly as it appeared. As I crested a steep hill near an old collapsed silo, the lights returned. They were exactly as before. two soft, pale glows maintaining the same precise spacing. No engine sound, no dust cloud, just those strange lights hovering in the curve behind me. My heart raced a little. I decided to head to the Oakfield Missionary Church just ahead. I'd stop, get out, and see what was happening. Maybe it was just teenagers playing a prank. I pulled into the lot and killed the engine. The dome light illuminated the interior as I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. Silence enveloped me. I walked to the lot's edge and looked both ways. The road was empty again, its mech, as if nothing had ever been there. The road was empty, nothing moving except a tree swaying gently in the breeze. I stood there, feeling foolish. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, gravel shifting across the road from the other side of the tree line. Just a single crunch, like a footstep. I called out, "Hello." Silence answered. Back in the car, I locked the doors and drove on, refusing to stop this time. 5 minutes later, the lights reappeared but kept their distance, always the same space behind me. As I crested the ridge leading into the last stretch before town, open fields spread out on both sides. The glow of Athens ahead signaled civilization, and in that moment, the lights vanished. Not faded, disappeared completely. I pulled into the Waffle House on Epsbridge, sat in the lot, and drank a Coke. My hands trembled slightly. No other car, no headlights had been on that road during my drive. Just mine and those mysterious lights. I've driven this route countless times since, and though I still travel it occasionally, those lights never returned, and I never stop anymore. It was a fleeting moment, less than a second long. As the morning meteorologist at KZNV Channel 8, a small TV station in central Nevada, I was the only one who noticed. Our coverage area is mostly empty, desert ranches and scattered towns like isolated islands. I'm not a dramatic weatherman, just someone who enjoys maps, wind patterns, and a quiet routine. It happened mid-January, about a year ago, a cold, clear Wednesday morning. My usual routine: arrive at 3:45 a.m., brew instant coffee, settle into my office, and pull up radar feeds. It's more habit than anything, especially since interesting weather is rare at that hour. Around 4:10 a.m., I was reviewing archived loops from the past hour, searching for jet stream anomalies or inversion signs. Using our third-party Doppler tool layered over NWS data, I set the animation to 10-second increments. During the sweep from 34.210 to 34.220, something caught my eye, a brief flicker. I scrubbed back, freezing the frame at 34.214. Over the Carson Sink, a disturbance appeared. Not precipitation, not a weather front, something else entirely. A strange circular anomaly caught my attention, unlike anything I'd seen before. It was almost like a helicopter hovering low over water, creating a ring of ripples, except this happened in the air. The ring stretched massive, about 3 miles across, and vanished in the next frame. No lingering movement, no echo. It simply appeared, warped the local wind patterns, and disappeared. Initially, I thought it might be a technical glitch, but when I overlaid the raw wind model data, there was an actual spike, a brief uptick in surface wind shear localized to that exact spot. The wind shifted outward in every direction for a single reading before returning to normal. I printed the frame and marked the coordinates, planning to check satellite imagery later. Then the station lights flickered briefly, like a momentary brownout, before everything returned to normal. The Doppler program restarted unexpectedly, and when I reopened it, the specific 340-point frame had vanished. It jumped from 34.420 as if that timestamp never existed. I cross-referenced with the National Weather Service backup feed. Their data showed only a clean, empty desert with no anomalies. Our local server log revealed a 1-second clock mismatch around the same time. Nothing dramatic, just a small hiccup enough to displace a single frame. The printout remained, a faint, black and white ring. I tucked it into my folder, knowing I couldn't explain it on air. How could I describe something invisible that had bent the sky over the salt flats? Later that day, I drove toward the Carson Sink, about 45 minutes from town. The landscape was desolate. A flat alkali plain with cracked white dirt and weathered fence posts. The sky was cloudless and bright, the silence profound. I parked at the edge of a dry lake bed and stepped out. The wind felt unusually cold for midday, steady around 8 or 10 knots. Walking out, I scanned the ground. No tracks, Not unusual, given how quickly wind erases traces in this terrain. Then I spotted it, a patch where the crusted dirt had fractured differently. Not from vehicle tracks, but as if it had settled unevenly. A large ring of slightly darker, rougher soil, almost exactly the size of the radar disturbance. I crouched down to examine it closely. I touched the dirt, and something felt wrong. No lizards, no bugs, not even tumbleweeds stirred. The wind seemed muted, almost suffocated. Dead was the only word that fit. A flash caught my eye on the way back to the car, a brief white pulse behind me. I turned but saw nothing. No plane, no drone, just empty desert stretching out. My phone had powered off inexplicably, despite being at 80% battery when I left town. No response, no vibration. The car ignition turned sluggishly, as if struggling. The dashboard flickered to life, but the clock blinked 12, reset and confused. I drove slower than usual, constantly checking my mirrors. An unseen presence seemed to pace alongside me, just out of sight. Back at the station, everything looked normal. My phone powered on immediately, battery at 81%, no missed calls or strange logs. I checked the Doppler feed, clean, with no gaps. But the earlier printout showing the anomaly had vanished from my locked folder. Only 2 people had keys, me and Ed, the tech guy. He swore he hadn't touched anything. Days later, in my backyard weather station, something strange happened. At precisely 9:11 p.m., the anemometer stopped transmitting. Its 4333 MHz signal had always been rock-solid reliable. With a flashlight, I investigated. Everything appeared normal until I saw a shape near the fence, round, about 4 feet tall, motionless. When I aimed the light, nothing remained. The anemometer resumed transmission exactly 2 minutes later at 9:13. That night, a soft, rhythmic clicking sound drifted through my cracked bedroom window, like stones tapping together, slow, deliberate. I didn't sleep. I was flying my drone out near Aoyo Seco, a high desert area just north of Ta. It's barren but beautiful, with open spaces and scattered rock formations perfect for line-of-sight flying. I'd been out there a few times before, usually early weekend mornings when the wind's calm and no one's around. That Saturday, just after 7 a.m., the skies were clear and not even a breeze stirred. Cold enough that I wore gloves with cut-out fingers. My custom-built quadcopter with GPS hold and return to home was running smoothly, battery fully charged. I'd flown it up to about 300 feet and was doing wide passes back and forth along a narrow ridge. It wasn't especially high, but had a steep drop-off on the south side with loose rock and brush. About 6 minutes into the flight, something strange started happening. The drone kept veering slightly right whenever I tried to push it along a straight westward line. Maybe 5 or 10 degrees, but enough to show up on the controller's display. At first, I thought it was interference or GPS drift. But when I switched to manual mode, it still pushed itself off course. I hovered and recalibrated the compass. No errors. Tried again. Same thing. Every time I flew past a specific part of the ridge, just east of a crumbling basalt outcrop, the quad would twitch and swerve like something was nudging it. I landed, checked the props and gyro. Everything looked fine. Took off again. The issue persisted in that one spot. Flying higher or lower made no difference. It was like an invisible wall the drone didn't want to cross cleanly. Around the 10-minute mark, I brought it down. The next morning, the yard looked normal, but the shed door was open. I hadn't used it in weeks. Nothing was missing. But my backup anemometer was sitting on the ground outside the shed, perfectly centered in a patch of frost. No frost anywhere else in the yard, just that one circle. I boxed it up and mailed it to my cousin in Idaho, telling him it was a spare. I haven't asked if he's used it yet. I still do the morning weather. I still check radar loops every day, but I don't scrub through the Carson sync frames anymore. If something shows up again, I'm not sure I want to know. I switched to my backup battery and decided to make one more pass, this time slower and more methodical, recording everything. My drone, equipped with a GoPro mount and a stabilized high-res gimbal, cruised toward the ridge at around 200 feet altitude. No sudden movements, just a smooth, steady flight. As it passed over the same stretch, hovering not even 30 feet above the rocks, the quad jerked unexpectedly. The motors pitched harder than usual, almost like encountering turbulence. I kept my hands off the controls, watching the telemetry closely. A small altitude dip occurred, as if the drone momentarily lost lift, but it quickly bounced back and continued on its path. No warnings flashed, no failsafe triggered. The flight completed without further incident, and I gently landed in the same dirt patch I'd launched from. Later that afternoon, I transferred the footage to my laptop. Most of the video was standard, clean, smooth pans with nice lighting. But something caught my eye around the 4:23 mark of the second flight, right as the drone crossed that peculiar area. The video stuttered briefly, just a frame or two. Then I saw it. Something passed underneath the drone. Scrolling frame by frame, I could barely make it out, 2 or 3 frames at most. A dark, triangular shape, almost black and roughly 15 or 20 feet across, drifted silently along the ridge. It wasn't moving fast, just sliding sideways. No motion blur, no lines, but definitely not stationary. The camera captured a strange, uniform distortion around it, reminiscent of heat shimmer. I initially thought it might be a shadow or bird, but nothing matched. Sharp edges, too geometrically straight. Zooming in until pixels disintegrated, I confirmed it wasn't a lens glitch. It moved between background shrubs, passing in front of them, proving it had actual mass. Checking the GPS coordinates, I returned the next day. Walking to the exact spot, phone app guiding me to the drone's previous hover point, I found nothing. No tracks, no debris, just loose gravel and an oddly echoing environment. When I shouted, the rock wall reflected sound at an unusual angle, as if its shape were slightly off. I flew again, this time lower and following the same path precisely. The drone held its course perfectly, no drift, no interference, just a clean, unremarkable flight. Over the next 3 weekends, I returned with 2 different drones, determined to understand what I'd witnessed. The clip haunts me. I've watched it repeatedly, around 50 times now, and each viewing leaves me with the same unsettling feeling that something crucial is just beyond my grasp. It appeared only once, in that same consistent weather pattern. The strange triangular shape wasn't a shadow, at least not one I recognized. I never saw it directly with my own eyes. It was captured only on the footage. But I've kept the recording, and something about it continues to pull at my thoughts, like a puzzle with a missing piece that I can't quite locate. I apologize, but the text you've provided appears to be an incomplete fragment or partial sentence. There's not enough context to rewrite or restructure the text. Could you provide the full paragraph or script that you'd like me to rewrite?